Good evening, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get this meeting started. This is the Council Committee Meeting of the Whole. My name is Lynn Barnes, and I think we'll go ahead and ask the clerk to call the roll call, please.
Chair Barnes.
Present.
Committee members Bowersox.
Present.
Chenoweth.
Present.
Lewis.
Here.
Roberts.
Here.
Smythe. Here. Stevenson. Present. Mayor Pressing.
Here. Do we have any additions to the agenda at this time? Seeing none, is there a staff report from any of our staff that are present tonight? If not, let's go ahead and get an approval of the minutes from the previous meeting dated April 14th.
So moved.
Is there?
Second.
I think I've got a first, Heather, and then seconded by Dennis. All those in favor of approving the minutes indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to public input. Right now, I have a handful of individuals who would like to speak before, which would be now, and the subject is UPTV policies, and this is what I'd like to ask. If you have talked on this subject before and have something new to add, we would definitely want you to come and speak. I am going to be limiting everyone to 2 minutes because tonight, while we want to hear new input, absolutely, tonight we want to make sure that we have ample time as a council, to discuss the matter, specifically this evening, which is on our agenda. So I'll go ahead and first of all read 2 individuals who wanted to be noted about this but did not want to speak. Ben Grosser from 2106 South Race Street on free speech on UPTV, and he says he does not want to speak, but he does want to register his support. And then secondly, Shirley Stillinger from 1003 South Busey. Again, on the subject of UPTV Public Access Policies and Procedures Manual, and she does not wish to address us, but she wants to register her support. So those 2. And now I'd like to ask the individuals who wanted to speak to us, again, come to the table, state your name, state your address, and limit yourself to 2 minutes, and I'll give you a 15-second kind of heads up before you're closing. First individual is Frank Baker. Would you please come on up? Yeah, and the mic's the little thing right there.
I didn't expect to be the first one addressing the council. My name is Frank Baker. I live at 1909 South Vine in Urbana. Do you, the individual members of the Urbana City Council, want to be seen as condoning hate speech as it is now broadcast on UPTV? Because yes, the UPTV policies discussed 2 weeks ago and to be discussed again tonight condone these broadcasts to the extent that preventing the broadcast would require no action more complex than saying UPTV will broadcast only material that is created in full in the local community. To do anything else is to explicitly say, quote, yes, it's okay with the Urbana City Council for UPTV, an organization housed in and broadcasting from City Hall, to broadcast known lies and fraudulent arguments that have been used to set the stage for killing untold numbers of people, Jews, gays and lesbians, the handicapped, to sampled categories. The Urbana City Council finds this to be acceptable, end quote. Note that third-party material being broadcast is readily available via the Internet. All of this stuff has other outlets. While the Urbana City Council chooses not to challenge the constitutionality of this dangerous speech, neither is it obligated to provide a forum. If it chooses to provide that forum within a city building, it necessarily associates itself with that speech. A ban on such third-party content would abrogate no local citizen's free speech rights.
About 15 seconds more.
Okay. And one last hypothetical question, rhetorical. How many of your families come from parts of the world where their membership in a particular group creates an implicit threat against their safety or that of their children. Do you have any sense of how hard it would be for people coming out of that kind of a history to come forward to create counter-programming? You're asking people to step forward and make themselves targets again. And it's a very hard thing to do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Baker. Esther Patt?
Thank you. Esther Patt, 706 South Kohler. I'm speaking on behalf of Champaign County American Civil Liberties Union. In 1943, a bill was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives to keep the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan from using the U.S. mail to distribute their brochures. The bill failed in part because it was opposed by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and by the American Jewish Committee, two of the leading civil rights organizations at the time. 20 years earlier, the NAACP and the American Jewish Committee had supported censorship of the Klan and the Nazis, but they reversed their positions after becoming more involved in civil rights activism themselves because they feared that laws restricting unpopular speech could be used against civil rights activists. A guest commentary in yesterday's News Gazette about the current debate said about me that it is ironic that the president of the local ACLU who is defending free speech for Nazis is Jewish. There's nothing ironic about it. The basic principle is one that is central to Jewish thought. There's a famous story about Hillel, the ancient Jewish scholar, after whom the Hillel foundations around the country are named. Hillel once said, "I can explain the entire essence of the Torah," which is the Bible, "while standing on one foot." Then he stood on one foot and said, "Do not do unto others that which you would not have them do unto you." He didn't say, "Do not do unto others unless they are your enemies." Do not do unto others that which you would not want them to do unto you. It is for that reason that many, many Jewish people oppose censorship of Nazis. 30 years ago, when the ACLU sued the village of Skokie for trying to prevent the Nazis from marching, many Jewish people quit ACLU, and many Jewish people did not. And those of us who did not believed strongly that the interests of minorities are best protected when government cannot restrict speech based on its content. The best defense against fascism is freedom. Do not do unto others that which you would not have them do unto you. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol Mizrahi?
Carol Mizrahi. I live on Staley Avenue, Champaign. Thank you for allowing me to address you. The City Council of Urbana and UPTV Commission like to say that the taxpayers of Urbana do not financially support the federally mandated open access channel, that the equipment and salaries of UPTV employees are paid for in full by the cable company itself, Comcast, and that the only expense incurred by the taxpayers is the room in the city building from which UPTV broadcasts. Let's be honest, folks. Since when are the for-profits in business for altruistic reasons? They're not, and they shouldn't be. Therefore, let me assure you that the cost of an open access channel here is paid for by you and me and all Comcast or Insight subscribers. As an expense of doing business, it is figured into your monthly bill. Champaign-Urbana is not unique. Across the country, all communities find themselves with federally mandated public access channels. Some communities, possibly foreseeing the political and moral dilemmas ahead, rejected third-party programming from the get-go. Many others, when they saw the monster raise its ugly head, changed its policies and guidelines and or passed anti-hate speech laws and now wait to see if anyone will challenge them in court. The city of Urbana, on the other hand, has done neither, choosing instead to cluck its collective sympathetic tongue at the Jews in the community who are being slandered, maligned, and possibly endangered with such noble words as, "If we disallow the filthy lies being told about you, then we will be limiting someone else's access to free speech. So, sorry Jews, you'll all have to grit your teeth and bear it, taking solace in knowing that it's for the greater good of all." So what will the city of Urbana do? For 3 years, they have done nothing to resolve this issue. If it's going to be business as usual, then I have a suggestion. Let the really good people of Champaign-Urbana disconnect from Comcast. If enough people were to unsubscribe and negatively impact Comcast's bottom line, Comcast would probably bring pressure to bear on the city to change its guidelines. Disconnecting from Comcast is a win-win situation. There are at least a half a dozen established satellite dish networks available in the area, all anxious to provide you with service. It's less expensive than cable, gives you access to 250 channels, including local programming, and will not transmit racist programs, and has far more reliable service than Comcast.
Thank you. Danielle, a question for our guest.
Yes, I have a question. You said in your statement that many cities have passed anti-speech, hate speech ordinances, and that they have not been challenged. Could you provide us with some of those cities, because that is in contradiction to what our legal staff is telling us, and so
Okay.
if those resources are available, I'd really be interested in seeing them.
Okay, I'll follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Matthew Murray. And next on deck is Ruth Wyman. Matthew, thank you for coming. Just 2 minutes, if you could.
Okay, hi, my name is Matthew Murray. I'm a resident of 606 East High Street in Urbana, and thank you for the opportunity to address the council. I just wanted to speak on behalf of not cutting off third-party programming on UPTV. I watch, I've subscribed to Comcast, their basic service, and it is through the public access channel that I'm able to watch every morning of the week before I go to work, Democracy Now!, which I know that the community, there was a very strong movement of support to get that put on UPTV. It's the only place I know of right now that I can watch on TV, Gay USA, which I really enjoy. I also know it's the only place that I can also see Mosaic TV, except perhaps on the internet. But I do not think it's right to just essentially use a sledgehammer to deal with an issue in which anti-Semitic speech is also being broadcast. And I hope the council will not bow just to emotional pressure, but will consider the importance, the essential importance of open access channels on the cable network. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ruth Wyman. And on deck is Al Kagan.
Good evening. My name is Ruth Wyman. I live at 706 South Kohler, Apartment 6 in Urbana. I wanted to make sure that it's clear to council that this should not be perceived as a council versus Jews fight or battle. As some of you may know, I'm Jewish. My mother was born in 1934 in Stuttgart, and she and her parents were lucky enough to escape, eventually arriving in Chile, one of the few countries that accepted Jews from Nazi Germany. My grandmother's family wasn't so lucky and perished in Riga. But that doesn't mean that I oppose free speech, that I oppose or that I would support any sort of restrictions on free speech that is being considered, and that is a modification of the UPTV policy that would prohibit third-party broadcasting. You all know you weren't elected just to make easy decisions. Anyone can make easy decisions. You guys are elected to make the hard decisions, and this is one of those. But one shouldn't, and I urge you to not modify the UPTV policies to just because of this program. There will be other programs that are against gays and programs that are against African Americans and other people of color. But that doesn't mean that our policy should be changed just so that there's only local programming. And I think other people have also discussed that there's local programming that could be made that would be against Jews or against gays and lesbians. The policy should not be changed just because of this one program or because of other programs that might be aired. I urge you to follow the Constitution. You have rights of prior restraint and other First Amendment rights, but I urge you to not modify the UPTV policies just to just to keep this one third-party program that's filled with anti-Semitic speech that would then prohibit other third-party programs that have been mentioned before. Gay USA is one of the programs that I watch. I know Democracy Now! Is another favorite program. There are a lot of great programs out there. I think it's great to have local, these programs broadcast locally so all of us can see them, and I urge you again to not prohibit third-party programming just because of this one program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Al Kagan, and on deck is Gary Mason.
I'm Al Kagan. I live at 310 West Hill Street in Champaign. And thanks for the opportunity tonight. I was part of the original group of people that lobbied to get Democracy Now! On UPTV. We worked very, very hard for a matter of months to make that happen. There was quite a community support to make that happen, and it wouldn't have happened without a lot of work from a lot of people. I get up early Monday through Friday so I can be ready at 7 o'clock to watch Democracy Now! There is probably nothing else that would get me up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Somebody mentioned Mosaic. I also watch Mosaic sometimes. In this time when the Middle East is so important, how are you going to see Middle East news any other way? Okay? So it's really important that in a time of war, in a time when the economy is sinking, that we get alternative views, including, and it's alternative to the networks and alternative to PBS also. What I want to leave you with is the idea, don't do anything that would result in taking Democracy Now! Off the air. Do whatever you need to do to keep it on the air. Thank you.
Gary Mason. And then next will be Mark Ansel.
My name is Gary Mason. I live at 2505 St. Andrews Road in Urbana, and I'm a member of the First Baptist Church of Champaign. 2 weeks ago, my wife and I were here. We left at 11:30 when you did, and we were a little disappointed in the agenda 2 weeks ago because we listened to the council wordsmith, the beautification program, and that's all pretty cool. The Boneyard project is pretty nice too. But let me tell you, do you want to live in a neighborhood and a city that allows and promotes hate? And that has come up and been said better than I could say it in the newspaper and tonight and 2 weeks ago. So I won't go into that. But we're here to discuss the heart and soul of this community. My wife and I retired. We sold our house over on the State Streets, and we decided to build a new house in Urbana 3 years ago. We made a commitment to this community, and now, to be quite honest, we're disappointed. And we're disappointed that this has gone on for 3 years, and we don't know what to do. We really like it here, but do I like it here enough to stay? I don't know. I don't know. We'll see what you come up with. There's been significant dialogue, like I said, over the last month, and we really need you honestly to consider what the ramifications are to this community of this decision. I understand there are some nice programs on there. I've watched a few of them, but you can get this other places than on Channel 6. The other thing that I think you need to be cognizant of is you are our representatives, and we will watch how you vote. And I would request, and I asked Mayor Pershing today, and I appreciated the phone call back, about how the vote will be recorded. And I would hope that you would have enough honor towards us to have a roll call vote on this issue. I don't quite understand the rules of this council, but this is really important. I can't think of a more important subject than this right here to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Ansel. And then next is Ronald Kosman.
Good evening. My name is Mark Ansel, and I live at 102 West Pennsylvania in Urbana. And all of the people in this room behind me, all of them, are friends of mine. I applaud every effort to suppress the ugly, sick speech of anti-Semitism or any hate speech, except the effort of government to suppress it. I'm here to speak in favor of the First Amendment and in favor of free speech, and in opposition to government suppression of speech, of any speech, including hate speech. Why? I think there's two reasons I'd like to mention to you tonight. The first one is, it is the law. The government cannot suppress hate speech. The First Amendment does not allow it. I have looked, and I'm not aware of any hate speech ordinances popping up around the country that are standing up under court challenge. I don't believe there are any. If they were challenged, I don't think they could possibly stand up in court. So first of all, it's the law. But second of all, it is my view, and it is my opinion, that it is a good law. And I think it's a good law because I think that it is important that we have hate speech out in the open where we can see it, and we can recognize it, and we can engage it, and we can defeat it. If it's not on this channel, it will still be, but it will not be as obvious. And I think that there's a public service in keeping it out and in the sunshine and engaging it and confronting it and defeating it. Let me ask one last question, and that is, if it were suppressed, would it make us as a people stronger, or would it make us weaker when we have to confront it eventually again, somewhere, some way? I think it would make us as a people weaker. So I am in favor of free speech, and I do not believe that the government has any business suppressing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ronald Kosman. And next is Ondine Gross.
Sorry. Good evening. My name is Ronald Kosman. I live at 1004 Wilshire Court. I'd like to thank the council for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. It seems that the crux of this discussion has been, can we, or should we, and can we suppress or stop these programs because we find them offensive? And one of the gentlemen who spoke 2 weeks ago made the argument that that's not appropriate. We can't stop it just because someone's being mean to us. I think the problem is that we're asking the wrong question. The question should not be, should we and can we stop these programs because we find them offensive? The question should be, can we and should we stop these programs because they are lies? They're untrue. This is not an issue of make him stop because he's being mean to me. This is an issue of make him stop because he is lying about me. That's a difference. The other issue is everyone keeps waving the First Amendment around. Free speech. Everyone gets freedom of speech. Freedom of speech means that this gentleman can go out on a street corner and say whatever he wants to say. Freedom of speech, I believe, means that he can go purchase television broadcasting equipment, get the appropriate FCC licenses, and broadcast whatever programming he wants on his own private network. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is the local government is facilitating his free speech. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a dumb heart surgeon. But I'm pretty sure that nowhere in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights is there any requirement for the government to facilitate free speech. It's required to allow it, but not to facilitate it. As far as the lies, and someone used the word before, in the current UPTV operational procedures and policies manual, Section 3.4 describes prohibited programming, and I quote, presentation of the following is prohibited. Any material which constitutes libel or slander. Seems to me that takes care of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ondine Gross. And then Morton Brussel.
Hello, I'm Morton Brussel. I live in 2003 George F. Drive, Urbana. I have a statement here, but just to take up on the topic of the last speaker, what about lies that are promulgated on the public airwaves? Should they be permitted? I don't think the answer is simple. We have myriad and manifest examples of establishment government lies, here and now in connection with our national policies, that are promulgated in our media, private and public, all using the public airwaves. Are those to be suppressed? Or are we to promote the falsity and the refutation of those lies? What about unintentional lies, so-called mistakes? How do we judge this? Now that's what I want to say about the lies aspect of the thing. I've taken a great amount of pride in the fact that we had an open medium for the expression of the citizenry here in UPTV. And I understand the fear and antipathy with which Jews and others, gays and minorities, may feel when attacked on the basis of their identification, their group identification. But really, are they in danger? I think not. We are not at present in the time of Germany of the 1930s, or even in the United States in those times. Anti-Semitism, for example, in the United States today is not really a serious issue, given all the other problems that we really have. And I think that even if it is a serious issue to have virulent attacks against groups of others, the way to combat it is to get up and say why you're opposed to that and why it's wrong. A crucial question for me is, who is to determine what is hate speech? Who is to decide, to judge? For example, is severe criticism of Israel and its Zionist policies hate speech? Certainly, that has been a prominent issue in recent times. Those who have criticized Israeli policies and its Zionist supporters have been themselves subjected to what I would call hate speech. So one can see the dangers here. Hate speech ordinances tend to favor majority accepted viewpoints. Is the denigration and or denial of God, of Christ, or of the Muslim prophet hate speech? People rail against socialists, atheists, communists, not to speak of Islamofascists. Others are against abortionists and child killers. Is that hate speech?
Mr. Brussel, just a few more seconds. We're trying to keep the 2 minutes.
Hate speech is too often only in the eye of the beholder, which is not to say, and I don't wish to say it, that it is not to be condemned and refuted. However, there's a slippery slope here which has been well documented in what the Supreme Court has concluded in protecting all speech.
Thank you. Ms. Gross.
My name is Ondine Gross. I'm at 1101 Wilshire Court in Champaign. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I also want to thank the people who spoke 2 weeks ago on this topic who were not Jewish. I consider them allies. There were people from different backgrounds who really understood that to build community, you want to make a harmonious environment for everyone, and I just want to say thanks to those people. It meant a lot to me personally. I appreciate that people comment on hate speech in a very intellectual way and make very good arguments, and we've heard quite a few tonight. I'm not concerned about those people viewing hate speech. I work with teenagers. I'm a school psychologist, and I work with some vulnerable people and young people. So I think those are the people that we should be concerned about who are absorbing this material. And the one thing I do want to say that I didn't say last time is a quote that was in the News Gazette article on this issue on Saturday, April 12th. And it was a quote by Urbana Alderwoman Danielle Chenoweth. And she said, we can regulate time and location, but we don't regulate content. So I want to move away a little bit from the broad brush of free speech versus not free speech, but let's talk about those particulars, such as time. It's my understanding that the show that people are referring to as disgusting and horrendous and anti-Semitic and hate speech and all that stuff was at 5 p.m. for over a year. The Jewish committee that worked with UPTV people worked very, very hard to move this awful material out of prime time. So I guess one of my questions is, what can we regulate, and why was this at 5 p.m. for over a year? Only now is the same show at 11 p.m., which is still, I would consider prime time if you're a college student or if you're just relaxing and watching channel surfing late at night. So, let's look at what we can control. I'm not a free speech scholar, but, let's look at the particulars and the details of how this type of policy is being realized and some of the roadblocks for the people who have made very good legal and other arguments about, if you build it, they will come. We understand that this thing was built. We understand that there's people who enjoy lots of things. But if there's a particular issue that's hurting people and those people have made a point of saying it's causing us harm, there has been violence in this community based on anti-Semitic beliefs from teenagers who were vulnerable, what are we doing by putting this show on at 5 p.m. and at 11 p.m.? Thank you.
Thank you. One final speaker at this time, Andrea Klein.
Is this the microphone?
It is. So we're trying to limit comments just a couple minutes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I believe that government has the responsibility to protect its citizens, and that hate speech and anti-Semitic speech, racist speech, poisons the minds of children, teenagers, and vulnerable individuals who are predisposed to hate. Recently, in a community I lived in Norwich, New York, a group of teenagers trashed and burned a synagogue. The synagogue did not have enough money, insurance protection to cover it, so that synagogue is now defunct. Are we going to really wait until this kind of speech poisons the mind of vulnerable individuals who, for a host of emotional reasons, need to hate? And do I have to worry about my children and the children of our temple being exposed to acts of violence? What are you going to do when in a year from now or at some point this kind of programming infects the minds of children and vulnerable individuals and they commit acts of hate crime? And the onus of responsibility is on you about this. I just returned from Japan, and that is a country where there is very little crime whatsoever, and there is a lot of control. But the issue is that the society will not tolerate it, and so it doesn't happen. So I think as a society we have a responsibility to protect our citizens. I do not feel protected by the current permission to have anti-Semitic programming on our airwaves.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I believe that's all the public input before the topics, and now we'll move into our discussion. Next on the agenda is item number 5 with regard to the...
I got a couple announcements. Sorry.
Announcements?
Yes.
Okay. Bill, come on up. We'll be ready in a minute. Go ahead, Charlie.
Open this one up. I got at least one. I've gotten several emails on it, but I know one in particular showed up just a few minutes ago.
Can you check your mic? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Carol Inskeep would like to go on record supporting free speech and UPTV as it currently exists. And I also got a letter from I can't read the first name. I can't read the writing here. Mrs. Stewart, who is in support of a cell phone ban.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Bill Gray, do you want to take us down the road of sidewalks?
Tonight's a long agenda, so I'll be brief. I provided a memo which talked a little bit about pros and cons of replacing the 4-foot sidewalk on Philo Road, both sides of Philo Road between Florida and Colorado. We looked at various alternatives over the last few weeks, talked to a variety of people, did have provided some public input via email too, just voicing concerns. And the long and the short of this mini analysis is we believe that we should probably replace the walks that will need to be replaced as part of redevelopment. And one example is we'll be working with the redevelopment occurring with Chris Creek on the east side of the street, south of the bank, north of the former Joel Osco site. And there we'll be able to replace that sidewalk for the most part, the entire width, from 4 foot to 5 foot, because the driveways are going to be changing, and that makes up a majority of the frontage on that street. Other than that, where we have those opportunities, whether it's this year or in the coming years, or where there's just bad sidewalk squares or ADA-related defects out there, that's our recommendation at this time. And largely it boils down to we do have serviceable walk now, and we are talking about an expense over $100,000, and you'll be hearing about the CIP here in the coming weeks, and there's just a whole host of projects that we have out there. So the recommendation is not to replace the entire serviceable 4-foot walks that exist there now.
Danielle?
I just have a couple of questions, and we'll get to comments later. The questions are, what would the cost be for half for the west side to be replaced and not east? Is it roughly half of what you quoted us, or does it not work that way?
The east side would be a little less money because there is an existing 5-foot stretch in front of the former bank. So to answer your question, it would be every bit of $50,000 to probably $60,000.
Okay. And then the second question is with the Chris Creek development, are we putting the sidewalks in, or is he?
It's a combination of both.
Like 50-50 or?
About that, yes.
And is that already been budgeted, that we would be putting in sidewalks there?
We do have some money budgeted in this fiscal year for that. Depending on what the final amount is, I would say we have money covered this fiscal year to take care of that one piece.
Then my last question is on the west side of the street, the side with most of the businesses. I walked both sides of the street today to get a sense of this, since it's a pretty big expenditure, and the light posts abut the sidewalk. So my question is, does the public own property to the west of the current sidewalk such that there would be place for us to build 5 feet or even 5.5 feet? How much space west of the existing sidewalk does the public own roughly?
If you're referring to the west side of Philo Road?
The west side. So it's the west side
Right.
of the west side of Philo Road.
Generally, it's about a foot to the property line.
So we have about a foot to play with. So we would
If
still,
there is
if we were to replace the sidewalk, it would still be butting up against those light poles.
Correct.
Okay. I have comments, but I'll wait till questions is over.
Any other questions for Bill? Now let's proceed with our discussion. Danielle?
Just, so my concerns were opportunity cost, and in particular, I keep thinking about places where we have no sidewalks whatsoever, and thinking rebuilding sidewalk here versus building sidewalk where we don't have sidewalk, like on parts of Main Street that, are near a park, and we need sidewalks for people to access the park, really basic kind of public works needs. I also compared sidewalks to the other parts of the city. Illinois Street, where I live, has probably more foot traffic than the foot traffic on Philo Road. I measured the sidewalks there. They're actually 4 feet and 3 inches or so in front of, alongside Illinois Street. And Florida Avenue has 4.5 feet sidewalks, and then Philo Road had the 4 feet. But what I noticed is on the east side of Philo Road, because there's 10 feet of right-of-way, so there's a lot of green space. There's 10 feet all the way to the street, and I don't think that's going to change. We're not changing where curbs are. And to the east side of the sidewalk, the parking lots are pretty distant. So when you're walking on that sidewalk, even though there's 4 feet to walk on, you feel like you have plenty of space. And I actually watched I measured myself, I'm 2 feet, okay, 2 people can walk along here. I also noticed that there were 2 large men I'm 2 feet, 2 large men who were walking side by side who had gotten off the MTD. They were able to go. There was a guy with 4 dogs. He was on the 4-foot street. The dogs looked a little cramped, but and it was hailing, so we were all having fun in the hail this afternoon. So the east side seemed to be fine, and there was that 5-foot piece in front of the bank. The west side, parts were fine, and parts, because of the light post, literally if you were walking side by side, you would get clipped at every light post. And so it's much more that people are constrained. Also, the parking lots come up close to the sidewalks on that side, and there's a lot more activity on that side in terms of businesses. So I guess I asked the question about how much it would cost. I mean, it looks like we would probably spend $60,000 to widen the sidewalk on that side, and probably some extra because we're talking about doing the Chris Creek. And it concerns me, the budget piece concerns me. But I do think that if we consider doing widening, I don't see a need on the east side I walked the entire length today. I do think that if we were to expand the sidewalk, the west side would be a good candidate. And I think actually if we could even widen it to like 5 and a couple of inches and really get a full sidewalk on that side because of the issue with the lamppost being there, I think we should consider. I also did notice that the west side was pooling with water and it had damaged sidewalk. I mean, it was in fairly good shape, but there were parts where it was clearly buckled up or it came down and there was water collecting in the sidewalk, and there were some repairs that needed to be made. So, I guess that's my report, and I don't know where council wants to go with it, but I would support us considering replacement on the west side before we do all the expensive landscaping. And perhaps we can look at maybe pulling back a little bit more in terms of what we're talking about with landscaping so that we can afford the sidewalk. This is the kind of trade-offs we need to look at financially.
Other comments? Brandon?
First, I sort of actually have a question. Bill, you said under the cons, the third con is that additional design required to include this in the scope of work would push the project into the next construction season. Is that the case for both sides or either side?
Yeah, either side or both sides, yes.
Okay. Because I guess one of the main criteria for me still is let's get it done this season.
I agree.
We've been planning these changes for so long, let's make it happen. I guess I'll also say what I said last week. I still feel like, and I've heard from a number of constituents, that it just isn't right to spend public money when we have sidewalk gaps near grade schools, when we have places there aren't sidewalks on even either side of the street, like East Main Street, near parks, places people want to get, to tear up a perfectly good sidewalk or a mostly good sidewalk that's 4 feet only to re-pour one that's 5 feet and spend money in a year where we have so many projects competing for funds, just to me doesn't seem like the right priority. So I'm fine doing neither side of sidewalks and doing the rest of the project, which is absolutely beautiful and which will greatly enhance the corridor.
I'm calling on myself. I'm in agreement that I hate to push this project further out, and based on that, as well as, it is doing 2 sides we can't afford. It'd be nice if we could do the west side, which is the busier side, and the side with more egress. Maybe that's something that could be done, in the near future, and not something that would have to wait for a long time. But I think it's probably in our best interest to proceed with the plan as is and leave the sidewalks alone, but improve them as we can. And anytime there's a little chance that we can go in cahoots with an owner, to be able to widen that sidewalk, we should be aggressive about that. Laurel, or Mayor Pressing.
I also think it's a good idea what you suggested to replace them as we need them, but does that mean that the plan needs to be revised to allow for 5-foot widths in the future?
No, we can go forward the way it is, and if we have those opportunities in the future, we can adjust accordingly. It would impact, in some cases, some of the landscaping may be removed, but no, we can take our plan and go with it.
Robert.
Bill, how do you handle the ADA and the other issues? Is that part of the existing plan to cover that, to make sure that there's no issues once this project is completed with the sidewalks?
Well, how we handle it is certainly with new construction, we make sure that it meets, current standards.
Before we had some heaving or whatever.
Right. If we have defects like that, we will remove and replace and take care of those situations.
This is a discussion item, so no real motions needed. Do you feel like you have enough direction from council?
Yes, I do.
Are we all pretty much in agreement? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Bill.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Hard decision, but...
It is. Thanks for your work. Our next item is item number 6, and it's ordinance number 2008-03023, an ordinance banning the use of mobile electronic devices while driving in the city of Urbana, Illinois. I guess I'll turn this over to Ron.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to probably request that we have some more time for this issue for one really central issue. Staff and I have been looking into the issue of the efficacy of cell phone bans. We've been trying to look at some information from particularly two cities, Santa Fe and New York City, who are or have compiled data on the results to their traffic accident statistics after passing such a ban. I'm also asking a staff person who's assisting me, Liz Davison, to looking at what other communities are doing. We also have had at least one meeting to discuss some possible different models for the cell phone ban. So at this time, we're just requesting a 2-week continuance of this issue so that we can further gather that information.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Charlie?
Yeah, a couple things to add in that come to my attention. The big issue I see now is just the general distracted driving. I'm getting a lot of people who favor us doing something, and in fact, probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the people I talk to, and a lot of people just come up to me randomly and encourage us to move forward with this ban. But I saw that in the news today that Chicago took the driver of the semi that crashed into the semi station away in handcuffs and have charged him with a distracted driving offense. And as far as I know, the state doesn't have one. Does Chicago have one, or is the attorney making up something?
I'll definitely check that. To my knowledge, I've never heard of that, but Chicago has thousands of ordinances that I'm not aware of, so it's entirely possible. But I know under the state, I don't believe that law has been passed yet.
Right, yeah. But I'm sort of curious what the attorney is charging this person with. But they hauled him off, and I don't recall there being a distracted driving provision in their cell phone ordinance as it currently stands.
No, there's not.
Because that was the ordinance we started talking about 18 months ago. So yeah. So if you could follow up on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Dennis?
I've been trying to get a handle on really what to think about this entire topic. And what I do know is that my brother calls me almost all the time, and he's always driving when he calls me, and he's always talking to me only when he drives, and he talks a lot, and I've heard him miss turns. He'll say, "Oh, darn it, I missed my turn." All right, but he didn't crash or kill anybody, so okay. And I know I see. Last time we talked about this, I counted just on just driving on Springfield Avenue from Neal Street to Urbana to come to the meeting. I counted 17 people they were on the cell phones, and 5 people were eating something, and 1 person was combing their hair. So, I mean, there's a lot of distraction out there. I didn't find anybody having a crash that particular time, so I don't know. I have a concern about overprotecting everybody, and yet I also have a feeling that some protection, such as seat belts, has proven to be effective. And it was interesting to learn that one of the states that has enacted a cell phone ban is New Jersey, and then it said but New Jersey does not enforce seatbelt laws. It's the only state in the union that does not require people to buckle up for safety. So I thought that was very peculiar. And then I have one other thing that I came across. The Governor's Highway Safety Association has a website, and it says that on the website that they indeed are against distracted driving. However, what is less clear, and I'm quoting now, is the impact of cell phone bans. To date, there has not been any research on the various handheld bans that have been enacted in numerous jurisdictions. These types of laws are difficult to enforce and may give drivers a false sense of safety. For these reasons, the Governor's Highway Safety Association continues to oppose handheld cell phone bans. So I thought that was very interesting. I don't know the source of this organization. It sounded like a realistic and useful source to look into why they feel that they don't, at this point, endorse them. So that might be something for the city to look into.
Certainly.
Okay, other comments? Charlie?
Yeah, remember, there's another issue I'd like to ask, too. There are some states, I believe, that now ban text messaging. I'd like to know about them. And getting back to what you just said, Dennis, the issue, of course, on the efficacy of these bans is that nobody bans the use of cell phones outright. It's all based on hands-free, and all the research suggests that hands-free is no different from holding it up to your ear. You're distracted equally both ways, so you're not going to see the effect of a hands-free ban because it doesn't work.
Danielle, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I actually just, since we're spending some more time on this, I have a couple of questions for Ron, perhaps for you to follow up with. The first is there any precedent for a Twin Cities to have one city banning cell phone use and the other city not? And if so, I'd like to know.
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Are there any Twin Cities that are real close to each other that have
like
a kind
St.
of
Paul, Minneapolis,
Exactly.
that type of thing?
that kind of thing, or moving to normal, or these kinds of things, where there's, one has banned and the other hasn't.
Okay.
The second, or some sense of proximity. The second is there was some interest in including bicycles and people talking on cell phones while biking. I want to understand if there's any precedent for that in other communities. I have some concerns about that and actually think it's going too far, but I'd like us to look at that.
May I clarify?
Yes.
1 second. When you were asking about bicyclists, do you mean while bicycling,
While
sitting
bicycling.
astride of a bicycle, or
No,
while
I'm talking
moving?
about while people are moving on a bicycle.
Okay.
There was, I believe Charlie had suggested the last time that we met that bicycles would be included or may be included in this. Okay, and so, yeah, so I want to understand if bicycles are generally included or not. And then there's some data that I've seen in terms of the hands-free and handheld. And actually, for me, a lot of it comes down to that because I generally feel like we need to do something. But being the very first city, since there's no cities or no countries that have actually banned Bluetooth or wireless devices, they all ban just the handheld devices. I'm concerned about the city establishing a stringent precedent that we don't need to establish. So I've seen data from the advocates of the cell phone ban. I'd like actually legal to spend some time providing some either independent verification of that data or looking at that data in particular and seeing if we can support it, or is it or if there's contradictions out there in terms of the data, et cetera. I just want to get a handle on that. I did talk to Chief Adair and asked him if we could get crash data on Urbana linked to cell phone usage, because this would give us our best information, our local information. And he said that that's not the kind of thing that when there's a crash, they're really focused on other things other than whether the person was on a cell phone. It's not one of the questions that they've been asking. Certainly they can start looking at that, but they don't have that kind of data. So I just wanted to share that with the committee at this point.
Can I address that issue with
yeah.
you, by the way? One of the conversations that we had in our staff meeting was to perhaps do a one-year study in Urbana, actually having all, yeah, you did.
Sorry,
I was
Dara, I
wondering
took
where
you out
that
of
came from,
retirement
but-
and brought you back here. I meant Chief Bealey. I'm just so used to working with Adair, so
Well, I
good.
thought maybe you really had a conversation with him.
No, I talked with Chief Bealey. Actually, Adair, hopefully he's on a beach enjoying himself in his retirement. So,
We actually talked about having a one-year study in Urbana of this very question. In other words, taking a look, a 12-month snapshot to find out, to the best of our ability, how many accidents, whether there's property damage or injury or fatality, that we could attribute it directly to cell phone usage, so that we're not guessing at these issues. We can actually say, you know, here's the baseline, because the idea would be that no matter what ordinance was passed, we could start at that baseline and then maybe look at, you know, have some sort of sunset provision in the ordinance so that we are required to look at it again maybe in a year or 18 months or whatever and see if the ban may have affected those numbers. So, but it would, of course, take, you know, some amount of time because we need to get the baseline. But that's just something we were discussing.
okay, and just a final comment, and I don't know, this is not data that we can collect exactly, but it is something that came to me from some folks in town who raised the concern about the effect of a cell phone ban in Urbana and not Champaign on business, and they were describing themselves as busy moms who are trying to figure out where to buy the shop, you know, where to go shopping that day. They're in their van, they're talking to their daughter on the phone, trying to get her home from school, and all of a sudden, approaching Wright Street, they realize they have a choice. They can either go shopping in Champaign and get all their groceries there, or turn off their cell phone and go shopping in Urbana. So I bring that up as a scenario that we have to be thinking about. It's not to pit human life against business development in Urbana, but I just think it's something that is important for us to consider, because I think a lot of people, as they're talking, they may be making some choices about where to go based on this kind of thing. So on the other hand, I think that if we were to enact a cell phone ban that was for handhelds only and not for Bluetooth or wire, I think we might have a positive influence on the whole community, because people would become trained that that's how they need to talk when they're on a cell phone, and they do it throughout Champaign-Urbana, and it wouldn't be a barrier at Wright Street because they wouldn't have to get off the phone. So I actually feel like to enact change in the whole community, it might be better for us to start with that, look at the data, watch what other cities do, and if it, you know, over time, we can really substantiate the argument with our local data that, you know, that people talking hands-free is still causing accidents, then, yeah, we should look and see what we can do to protect the public interest. So I guess those are my comments at this point.
Mayor Pressing.
I'd like to respond to the comments on seatbelts and cell phones. When seatbelt laws were passed, there were people that were completely outraged because they thought that was interfering with their personal freedom. I think they've proven to be lifesavers, and people are used to the idea now. But if the research is correct, and it certainly looks like it's correct, people's attention is completely absorbed by a conversation on a cell phone, whether it's handheld or whether it's hands-free. And they're not only a menace to their own safety, they're a menace to other people's safety if there is an accident. And I certainly think that somebody who's riding a bicycle and talking on a cell phone is putting themselves at great risk. It's dangerous enough to be riding a bicycle on a road with cars. Road with cars, with the drivers talking on cell phones and the bicyclists talking on cell phones, is a truly terrifying scenario. So I think that we really do need to have information on what kind of accidents have occurred. And I think that we do need an educational campaign. I think there are problems with enforcing this, but people learned to use seat belts, and it wasn't probably because they all got tickets from police officers.
Okay, Robert and then Dennis.
I don't want to overburden you with things to do, but in my discussion with Mr. Bealey or Chief Bealey on this subject, my understanding was that it's extremely difficult to for example, if there's an accident and there is a person that you may have thought was on a cell phone, to procure those records?
That's correct.
And you have to do it through court, and it becomes very cumbersome just to find out if that person was or was not on the phone.
It is, from phone records, it's difficult, and I confirm this, with the State's Attorney's Office, it's difficult even in criminal cases, where there's been, like a felony crime committed, to get cell phone carriers to turn over their records. And basically it takes the writ of the court, a subpoena, to get these. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible for us to subpoena, but you have to remember, we go to court once a month, to city court. We are not, by any stretch of the imagination, the same as the State's Attorney's Office. And for us to get these phone records on what amounts to an ordinance violation, I'm not entirely certain that we could get them. Maybe we could, but you have to weigh and balance the results versus the effort that it would take to procure them.
Okay, Dennis?
Maybe this is just a general comment, but we're talking about people being distracted by driving as they drive. And of course, driving is a serious experience. You have to be trained, you have to be licensed by the state to operate a car. It's not a right. Teenagers now have to go through extensive training and put in hours of driving with their parents. So this is sort of a concern. I mean, we have a sense that we have the right to communicate as best we can, and our culture is being inundated with more and more objects which are of a distracting nature. If you stand at the bank or in any long lines, oftentimes now there are video displays on the walls, and they're in constant motion. We're involving ourselves with conversations with people who are not in the car by using cell phones. Currently, we're seeing more and more signs being installed along the city highways, which have display elements, digital display elements, which now are allowed to change every, 10 seconds. So there are more and more opportunities for distraction as we operate motor vehicles. And I think that whatever we choose to do, we should be aware. And I'm not sure how you can circumvent the onslaught of the digital technology when we're even finding out where to turn using electronic devices through satellite geopositioning. So in the future, maybe our windshields of our cars will be transmitting maps to us, and we can also watch the soaps as we drive. I'm not sure. But I think that we have to be very conscious about the choices that we make as individuals and as a culture. And we may not be making them ourselves. They may be actually being presented to us in almost an unstoppable onslaught. But I think that the more you keep your windows down and you're paying attention to the road ahead of you, and you're not being distracted because you're actually concentrating and have two hands on the wheel like they told you to do when you're in driver's training, the safer our community will be.
Okay, if there are no other comments, Ron, we'll talk to you again more about this in a couple weeks.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next item, ordinance number 2008-04029, an ordinance amending Chapter 3 Alcoholic Liquors of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Urbana, Illinois. That'd be you.
Yes. In the past, there have been several events that have popped up, for lack of a better word, we're going to call them an outdoor festival type event, where our liquor ordinances did not have a provision that allowed certain private business owners to have a temporary liquor license. Currently, our liquor ordinance provides only two such temporary liquor licenses. One would be for a special event that's conducted by or sponsored by a current license holder, like a Class A license holder. But that, like a temporary license only allows that license holder to conduct the event in the area contiguous to the property or building where they currently hold their license and serve alcohol. So, for example, if somebody wanted to do something in the parking lot of their bar, that would allow them to do it. The other one is for civic and charitable organizations. So what we don't have is something that allows, Acme Corporation, who wants to come and do a downtown festival for us, to have, and they're for profit, to have a temporary liquor license to sell beer at that type of festival. So what we're seeking to do here very simply is just to add a category, and that would be a T3 license, and it would be private, for-profit, for a festival promoter, whether local or someone from out of town, and says, I would like to come forward and put on this festival. And in order to help, keep our downtown and public cultural life and artistic life vibrant, it was thought that this would be something that would be good for the city to facilitate by creation of this. So it's really very simple.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, we have one member of the public who would like to speak, and so Perry Davidson, would you please come on up, make your comments, and then we'll have time for questions and discussion with Ron. I'm sorry. If you'd limit your remarks to 5 minutes.
I'm Logan Street from Muhammad, Illinois. I speak in support for the T3 edition of the T3 license. I'm here to kind of give a voice for Fluid Events and other private for-profit promoters. I'm one of many that you will, I think, find who would like to bring events to the community. However, without having this amendment, it forces companies like Fluid Events and others to move elsewhere, and we go to other communities. Which that causes us to pull people from this community as well as others, contributing to their economic and community growth. I've worked in Urbana for 7 years for an entertainment production company. However, very few of the events that we do are in this community. I will go to Champaign on a regular basis as well as other cities. I don't want to see that to continue. By doing this, I feel that it will help bring a new opportunity for economic growth to Urbana, not only through retail stores, restaurants, and hotels, but by bringing future residents to the community, by showing them what Urbana has to offer. I also ask you to allow Urbana residents another opportunity to stay in their community for entertainment instead of driving to Champaign or elsewhere.
Okay, questions for Mr. Davidson. Danielle, Charlie, and then Brandon. Danielle.
Good question. Can you give us a sense of what it's like to, or what you need to do in, say, Champaign or other cities to hold these kind of outdoor events with alcohol?
Champaign, in the past, what we've had to do is we have to file for a temporary, I believe it's a Class X liquor license is how they've done it. Same with Rantoul. You file through them, you go to and get a temporary liquor license. It's only allowed for certain periods of time and so many days.
And how much does it cost, do you recall?
It differs from town to town. I mean, it can be anywhere from, I think some towns are $50, some of them are a few $100s. So.
Okay, Charlie.
And yeah, that was part of my questions. And then, how many can you get per year in each community? Is there a limit?
Most of the towns I haven't run into a limit. It's really kind of a permit on a permit by permit basis.
Okay. Ron, maybe I don't understand it. Are you limiting this to 2 per any group in a year? I know there's a 180-day lead time or something like that, too.
Yes, and there's some reasoning, but that's, of course, not etched in stone. This is a draft presented for your consideration. The reason for limiting it for 2 per organization is because there is some interest in a community to control the sale of liquor, even on or alcohol, on a temporary basis. And what you don't want to have happen is some entity or organization coming and saying, hey, the streets are paved, there's a festival right there, the grass is green, the sky is blue, let's have a festival and sell alcohol. And so rather than them applying for a business or having a settled fixed business to sell alcohol, they have made it a sort of this little cottage industry of having temporary licenses. I'm not saying that problem can't be overcome, but that was the thinking in limiting it, the number of them.
I'll even make a comment on that. You know, speaking as a private for-profit, you know, festival promoter, you also don't want to oversaturate the market. You know, you could bring too much.
Right, you could bring too, okay, so like, does Champaign have a limit to the total number it issues per year, or, you know, I think, you know, we do have some local examples to work with, so I'm sort of interested in seeing what others do.
Mayor Preston?
Yes, I asked that this be drawn up because I know there's an interest in having more festivals in the downtown, and I also thought it would be a way to earn some money for the arts, and so I thought we should start out small and not try to have too much and just see how it goes, and then we'll learn, and if we need to amend it, we can amend it, but this is just to try to move this forward. Because we felt that the way things were set up, the UBA was being used and they weren't really being the actual operator of the festival. So this was to clear up some legal accountability issues and also make it easier for someone like Perry to bring his proposal. He came to us when we had one of our meetings on Urbana's 175th birthday, and we thought he had a good proposal, but our ordinances just wouldn't allow what he was proposing.
Well, Ron, do you want to respond to that, and then Dennis?
I just wanted to answer your second question about the 120-day lead time. Depending on the size of a festival, there could be a lot of planning that has to take place with regard to the police department and public works and determining whether or not certain streets can be blocked off, how they'll be facilitated. For example, Perry is working on something now, Blues and Brews?
Blues, Brews, and Barbecue.
Blues, Brews, and Barbecue Festival for this area. And, you know, I just found out recently, I don't know if Perry knows this or not, but due to the construction of the bell tower of the courthouse, the street on Main is going to be narrowed to one lane. And so there was that type of information and the planning that goes into deciding what streets get blocked off takes some amount of planning, and I just feel like you know when you're going to put a festival on, and 6 months of planning is not too long for that.
Charlie, and then Dennis.
It just struck me that 180 days is way too long. 120 days is probably still too long. I don't know. You know, I think a lot of times things get done in 60 to 90 days and even less. So I don't know. It just strikes me as too long a period.
It's 120. I'm sorry, I said 6 months. I meant 4 months. It's 120 days, not 180.
Perry, is that 4 months okay, or is that?
You know, from my aspect, I don't get me wrong, there are a lot of promoters that will come in and do things very last minute. You know, we have been working on this event since back in October of last year, trying to put it together and come up with the idea. And we came to the 175th birthday celebration committee to talk with them, I believe, towards the end of January. So, I mean,
so we need to get this passed so you can do your.
That would be great.
Dennis?
Okay, that's the right drift, Charlie. Yeah, and I want to speak to that too. Maybe for next year that's reasonable because that's next year. But right now, if we want to have anything happen this summer, 120 days is going to put us into August. And so if we do agree to that longer planning is necessary for whatever reasons, at least we should waive it this year and make it on a case-by-case basis, because we're going to miss the opportunity to have something happen in June or July. So
if you look in
whatever.
If you look in page 5 of 6 on section 2, the last paragraph, I put some language in there that said the amendments shall take effect upon passage by the City Council, except that the fee provisions in a 120-day application shall not operate if in conflict with agreements between the promoter and the city that were being negotiated. So in other words, I wrote that language in.
There's a slip clause then, okay.
Yeah, basically so that, because Perry has been working with the city for some time, and so I didn't want to, you know, put him at a disadvantage or keep him from doing something that he had been planning for a long time based on this language. So in effect, upon its passage, then 120 days from then, if somebody, you know, if somebody comes after this passage, then they'll have to wait, tell us they want to do it 120 days.
Are there any other questions for Perry? Perry, thank you very much. We'll keep talking. Is there a motion or?
I second that.
Okay, there's a motion to move this forward to council with a recommendation for approval, and seconded by Dennis, Brandon, and then Danielle and Charlie.
Yeah, thank you. I support festivals. I want us to make more things happen like this in downtown and all over town, so this is great. Let's move forward with it. I have two changes I think I'd like to suggest. The 120 days to me seems really long. The other festivals are all 14 days for T1 and T2, and so even Sweet Corn Festival and things, we've only really demanded 14 days prior. Now, of course, they plan Sweet Corn years in advance. We know the dates of it because blocking off streets, and there's all kinds of other things. So we're not promising if somebody turns in an application 15 days before an event that we'll close the street for them. It might be far too late for that. But for just the liquor license portion of it, it doesn't seem like we need such a long timeline. So I would support 14 days, 30 days, but I guess it doesn't make sense to have such a long timeline for me, and I'd like to make that amendment here in a second. Also, the cost, I think the $5,000 fee is much higher than Perry had mentioned, $50 or a few $100s. And to me, $5,000 was a big surprise because I think our other liquor, even a Class A license, I think you can get for less than $5,000. And that lasts for a whole year. So to charge $5,000 for a 2-day event seemed high. Definitely we want to raise money. Definitely I want more money for the arts and for bike paths and all kinds of things. I'd love to raise funds. But I think to raise funds at the expense of festivals, which we're trying to promote, we're not trying to make them so expensive that it's hard to pull off a festival. After all, these are cultural, civic events that people are, doing sort of as passions of love for the community, not huge for-profit ventures that in 2 days would, be able to charge a fee that is more than people would pay for a whole year of operating a bar. So to me, $100 seems reasonable, and I, without any other sort of rationale for where this comes. So I'm ready to make that motion unless other people have other suggestions or other advice.
Sounds like we have some other suggestions, maybe Charlie, and then, or Danielle, I'm sorry, then Charlie.
Let's see, just two quick questions and then some comments. The question is, do they pay tax on top of the 5% or $5,000?
Pay tax
Do they
to
pay
whom?
sales tax? The increment of the sales tax that comes to the city of Urbana, I believe it's 0.5% or 1%. Would they also pay sales tax?
That's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you right now. I don't
Okay.
know. I wouldn't think so, but I'd have to research that and find out for sure.
Just be good to know what the total cost,
Sure.
total revenue that's coming in. And then the second is, it sounds like there's two steps that any event promoter, a private event promoter, would need to go through. One is to actually get approved as a festival by the city council.
Yes,
And then the second is to go through the administrative proceedings of getting that. Is that correct?
that's correct.
And do we require that for T1 or T2?
No, and I'll explain to you why is
Okay.
because currently there are only two festivals. And I have to tell you that the long-range plan that I have is to actually have a standalone festival ordinance. In other words, outside of the liquor ordinance, to have one that addresses these sort of special events that are above and beyond your average block party. And given that we only have these two events, I decided when we're looking at these for-profit events to try to put in some parameters that would prevent this from spiraling out of control. Again, going back to the issue of that when it comes to liquor sales, we don't want any fly-by-night organization to just come by and say, we want a liquor license. And so I put in that it's not going to be considered a festival unless you all say it's a festival that you are adopting and you want to support and endorse. And sorry, I lost my train of thought. Your second part of your question was about.
I just wanted to understand if that was required by other folks. You said it, or for other licenses, you said no, and then
No,
you gave
because
the reason.
currently we basically all they have to do is apply
for a temporary liquor license, but I have to let you know, I'll make whatever changes you want, but for my purposes, something put on by a civic organization or by a bar that's right next to it, it's already a Class A liquor license and it has been vetted as a business, is different than a potentially brand-new, unknown quantity coming in and saying, we want to sell liquor in your community.
Okay, just two comments, and then I'll cede the floor. The first is, I definitely have concerns about the 120 days, particularly because, yes, it should take, 3 to 4 months to plan something, but it's also the case that as people are planning things, they don't always know all the information up front, and so they might miss that window of time when they were supposed to get it in, and they're planning in the early spring for something in the summer, and if they miss that window. So I really think that, Brendan, you said 60 days, is that? Oh.
Or 45 days, or...
I would just say I would
some-
recommend not making it 14 days. That
Okay.
is too short of a
Yeah.
window for staff to even, that would probably be
Yeah,
more
so I guess
likely.
I do think when thinking about public works, et cetera, that maybe 14 days is excessive, or not enough, but I think something like 60 days, 30 days or 60 days I'd be comfortable with. Then the other issue is I think we should come up with something that's scalable. Like, I don't think that a huge festival is always exactly what we want. We want to be able to have smaller festivals and larger festivals. One of my fondest memories of living in New York City was a puppetry festival that happened in the streets. There were maybe 250 people who showed up. We were drinking in the streets. I don't know if it was legal or not, honestly, at the time. It was just that there was alcohol being passed out, and we were drinking in the streets, having a good time. There were puppets. And so I wasn't a council member at the time, so I wasn't considering those things. I was a grad student. But I guess the issue is, I try to think how many beers you have to sell to pay for that license. You have to sell 2,000 beers at $2.50 a piece. It doesn't really make sense. How is it that you could get to how would anyone ever be able to do a festival if
One
it
of the
was 5,000?
One of the things I have to make sure you understand is that some of the discussions, at least the ones I've been part of, okay, so I'll put that qualifier on, talked about some of these festivals contemplated selling tickets at anywhere from $5, $10, $15, $20 a pop, in addition to food
Some.
concession, in addition to liquor concession, and any other type vendor things. And again, we're talking about for-profit situations. So to answer your question, I don't think the 5K would be raised strictly from alcohol sales. And my understanding is from events like Sweet Corn Festival, there's thousands of people attending. So if those thousands of people are potentially buying food and alcohol and other items for sale, there may be significant revenue generated from that. And if past performance at these festivals, the ones that we already have, are any indication, it's just an opinion, but I don't think the 5K would be onerous.
I guess it makes sense. The percentage makes sense to me because it scales. So percentage of gross receipts, okay, you have 20, I think Sweet Corn is 40,000 people who come, larger than the entire size of the city of Urbana come into downtown, and it looks that way when you go to Sweet Corn Festival. That's something that's been built over many, many years. And so I just wonder if, as we, since in the whereases it says to encourage people to do these kinds of events, and I agree with that. I think things should be scalable in some ways, and I guess $5,000 means you're not a player unless you have 20,000 people coming downtown. And I wonder if we should consider being able to allow for smaller events that are for-profit, and the 5,000 bar seems excessive to make that happen.
When you say smaller events, are you saying that you want those smaller events, like a 250-person thing, to be able to sell alcohol on public streets?
Yes, I mean, to be able to have a smaller event, yes, that has alcohol consumption is one of the things that happens. That's why the percentage makes sense, and maybe having some minimum that makes sure that we cover our costs, and then it can scale up based on what is, coming down the pipeline. And we can do the whatever is greater language. I just think that the 5,000 means you're not welcome to do a festival here unless you got 20,000 people coming in. I think that's really going to prohibit us having festivals in downtown. I think over time, we build up to things, and even if we look at the history of the Sweet Corn Festival, it didn't start out as 20,000. I mean, it took many years to build up to that. So that's my concern with it. Generally, I support the concept, and, I think we just need some tweaking.
There's two ways we can do this. We can have Ron take all of our feedback back, and then next week at council, and ahead of time, have read a new draft that we could amend on the floor. I mean, that might be, since we give him so much feedback, that might be the better way to proceed. I mean, I'm just offering that suggestion. Charlie?
I think that, the ordinance has a 5% of the gross receipts, which I think is a good way to tackle this, but the 5,000 as a minimum is a little onerous for beginning events, smaller events, which we want to encourage. And if it may take a while for you to get to writing a new ordinance. So I'd prefer to see that as a more reasonable number. And again, I think we need to take a look at the other communities in the area, how they do it to help tune this, and I clearly support the whole concept here, so.
Okay.
Okay.
Do I need to withdraw my motion?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to withdraw my motion.
Concerning the ordinance?
Ordinance, because it's not amended.
It's not ready yet.
It's not ready.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
As a seconder?
I agree to that.
Okay, so the motion's been withdrawn, so we're asking Ron, if he would, to go back, put pen to paper, and include the recommendations from the group tonight. Are there any other comments?
Let's just make it a formal motion to move to bring a new version of this ordinance based on the feedback from committee tonight to council next week.
Second.
Okay, there's been a motion, and it's been seconded. All those in favor of that motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, Dennis, you have a comment?
Yeah, I have a question. Is it going to be important, because there's two different kinds of events that could possibly happen, to define the two different situations? And this is an event that, to engage in it and to listen to the music at the stage or whatever of an event that's public and yet requires a ticket to be purchased to enter into the event domain, versus an event that is totally open to the public and people have total free access. I mean, is it important to make a distinction in how either the funding or the operation of the liquor license aspect of this process is defined?
If there is a compelling reason to make that distinction, I haven't thought of it, so if I was basically trying not to make this too bureaucratic or too tedious, so if you think of a compelling reason, I'd be happy to try to draft something that makes that distinction here, but I don't know how we could set it up so that it works for all comers.
Mm-hmm. Because I don't want to squelch very simple, smaller festivals, which could be very invigorating for the downtown.
Right.
Okay.
And I have to also tell you that I'm flying a little blind here, because we don't have all of these festivals. Some of the research we did for Madison, Wisconsin has a couple hundred a year.
That's our goal.
They have 249 festivals a year in Madison, Wisconsin, so.
I never go to Madison without there being a festival. It's actually true. There's always something happening in the streets of Madison.
Okay. All right, Ron, are you pretty well set?
I'm straight.
Okay, good. Thank you. We'll now move on to discussion item, or number item 8, Urbana Public Television, Public Access Policies and Procedures Manual Revisions. Now, before we maybe turn it over to you, Ron, we do have several other individuals who would like to offer public comment. Given that I have quite a stack of them here, I would like to ask you to please limit your comments to 2 minutes, and I will be timing you, and I'll kind of give you a 15-second heads up. First individual is Lee Malhado. Thank you. Come on up, state your name and your address, and then on deck is Robert Dunn.
Lee Malhado, Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation, 503 East John Street. I'm also a resident of Urbana. I live at 612 West Ohio. I'd just like to make a couple of brief points. One is, I think it's been brought up already, but I would like to emphasize that it's disingenuous to say that this is not a government channel. it is a government channel. It says it's UPTV. It doesn't say it's Comcast TV. It comes from this building. It is before this body that we are deliberating this. This is the body that gives the franchise to a provider, and it is this body that appoints the UPTV commission. So I think that it is very clearly connected with the government. The second point I'd like to make is that I'm looking at something rather different than what I think everybody else is paying attention to. I'm not looking so much at the free speech issue. Free speech is a very important value, but also is due process. And one of my concerns in the manual is that the minor and major violations, if you look at them, bear almost no relationship to the signed agreement of what the people say they are responsible for. The signed agreement is all kinds of things like, is there sexual content in this program? Have I gotten copyright permission? Do I know what the content of this material is? Is there any fundraising in it? But what the violations are all about is this inconvenient for the TV station? Have you brought your stuff in on time? The one content-based thing is the producer's name on the media. Everything else is, did you follow the procedures properly? Did you bring the stuff in late? Did you cancel your appointment with the studio? And I would really like to see the station accept more responsibility for what it is putting out on the airwaves, not the content of what it's putting out on the airwaves, but if there are rules, there are rules. There's a concept in U.S. law that is about due process, and I am deeply concerned with the tremendous lack of due process over the last 3 years in this. I think that Tim Brumley is being protected by this government, not because it wants to, but because it's afraid of suit. And I just am here to remind you that you could also be sued for failure of due process.
Robert Dunn, and then on deck is Gary Storm. Thank you.
My name's Robert Dunn, 309 East John Street in Champaign. Unfortunately, I was prepared for the regular 5-minute comment, so I had to readjust. And so I just wanted to ask some questions because I'm confused about the ACLU's stances on free speech. In 2005, there was a school valedictorian in Las Vegas, Nevada, who had her microphone pulled by school officials who were financed by the City of Nevada and the school board, all because she had the audacity to invoke the name of Jesus Christ in her speech. The ACLU did not support her right to free speech, but sided against her persecutors. Where is the ACLU when peaceful pro-life demonstrators are being harassed and arrested simply for their right to peacefully assemble? They're not there. Where is the ACLU when the College Republicans of San Francisco State University had their pro-America rally canceled arbitrarily, all because some people complained that it was going to be offensive? And where was the ACLU? I find it ironic that when it comes to politically incorrect speech, such as defending America, defending traditional religious values, or supporting the right to life, the ACLU does not stand up. When it comes to hate speech, like what we're talking about now, the ACLU is willing to support that. I don't get this.
All right, thank you for your comments. Gary Storm, and then on deck is Jamie Storm. Oh, you don't want it? Got it. Okay, thank you. In fact, I'll just read that. Just Gary Storm and both Jamie said they don't want to address, but they would like to speak in opposition to any change that would limit open access. Did I get that correct? Okay. Then we will go on to Stuart Levy.
Yes, I'm Stuart Leedy of 1108 Foley Avenue in Champaign. And I guess I'd like to say something that I've said several times to public broadcasting outlets in the past, that if you're not putting on material that I really don't want to see, that I object to, then you are not doing your job. You're not taking the risks that you ought to do as a public medium. And I think not only should you should you expect UPTV to sometimes carry material that some people don't like. You should carry material that I don't like. I've not seen Liddy's videos, but I've heard something about them. They sound repellent. They could easily be described as hate speech. They are far from alone in the speech that has far wider audiences than UPTV in being dangerous. But I hope that despite that you will decide to keep UPTV open without regard to content, if only to allow people to respond to such terrible things.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's it.
Wayne Johnson.
My name is Wayne Johnson. I live at 1810 South Vine Street in Urbana, Illinois. The concept of hate speech is somewhat of a neologism. We have a lot of neologisms floating around. We put two words together, and it seems like it describes something new. But these are not really new words, but this is an old idea, an ancient idea, that the ancients called it blasphemy, and blasphemy goes back to a strong Greek root, and it's been around for more than 2,000 more than 2,000 years. The founding fathers were aware of blasphemy. Some of them had been persecuted for things that they had said. Some of them, their relatives, had been thrown down into dungeons, had been burned at the stake for things that they said. Yet they saw it fit to put freedom of speech in our Constitution. The technology is irrelevant. They might have stood on a soapbox or on a rock somewhere or behind a pile of rocks so they could be heard. The technology changes all the time. But we must go with the Constitution. We must stay with what the founding fathers saw, with the roots. They knew that there would be tares that would be sown with the wheat, and sometimes we couldn't tell the lies from the truth, but we had to let the lies and the truth grow together and let them all be expressed. And when we begin to block new ideas, it's a dangerous thing, and we must have free expression of ideas as the Founding Fathers provided for us in the Constitution.
Thank you. Next is Rudiger, Laufhuette.
That is Rudiger Laufhuette, and last time you couldn't pronounce it either.
Okay. This is my first try.
I live in Champaign, 1614 Harrington Avenue, and I'll be very short.
Thank you.
If I look at this illustrious group of nice mixed people, I would say if you decide not to do something decisive to limit this kind of hateful stuff, particularly with Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Week coming up, as you also saw in the newspaper today, you all ought to be ashamed of yourself. I was born in Germany. I am a Jew. In 1944, I was born in Nazi Germany. And free speech über alles can also be translated into propaganda. And it is propaganda disseminated by the Stürmer and other such lovely publications in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s, that led to the Holocaust directly in the 1940s. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Rabbi Norman Klein. Norman Klein. And then our last speaker will be Ray Spooner.
Good evening. I'm Rabbi Klein. My home is in Champaign. I'm the rabbi of Sinai Temple. My house is 2601 Lakeview Drive. Fortuitous, but good that Rudy spoke first, because I was also going to mention the commemoration of the Holocaust that takes place this week, Yom HaShoah. I'm a firm defender of free speech, but one of the things people often forget, or perhaps assume that it's, sort of divine providence that caused it, is that the founding fathers of the American government built in a set of checks and balances, that not everything was going to go one way or the other. There was always some correction in terms of the perceived problem that things would go too far one way or the other. Moderation and balance is an important thing, going back, as a previous speaker did, to classical times. In this area of the specific subject matter that we're talking about, Rudy pointed out with a lot of truth to it that because of the German government, the way it was previous to the Nazis, you might say their theoretically wonderful principles led them to be open to a takeover by Nazism. I'm not saying that Urbana or the U.S. is going to be taken over by Nazis, but I am saying that we're ignoring the actual effect of these films on the participants. It was suggested in a recent editorial in our local paper that the Jewish community should educate people more and have more programming as an alternative to this. That didn't help then, and it's not going to help now, and we do a lot of programming educating people about the Holocaust. There are still Holocaust survivors in our community. Every time this show is aired, and they hear about it, it makes them suffer again the pangs of experiencing what they know all too well is a possibility in this world. I think you guys have a moral responsibility to put limits on free speech that are reasonable. Those who argue for unlimited free speech are arguing for a lack of checks and balances, which strikes me as antithetic to our American way of life.
Thank you, Rabbi Klein. And then lastly, do you have a specific question? Rabbi Klein?
Rabbi?
Go ahead, and we have one question for, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Dennis?
So if a reasonable limits to free speech were to be installed, do you believe that there should be, that the programs that are being aired on public television, UPTV, should be perhaps first reviewed by your synagogue before we can be showing them? Or I mean, because you would be the people who would know specifically what would be appropriate to talk about as far as the Jewish or the Hebrew faith?
Well, I don't know. I guess from the hissing in the background, I gathered people saw that as sort of a...
I don't know how to judge who would limit it or how they would do it.
Underhanded comment. I would say that obviously it's up to you to decide in what way you will measure what goes over the limits of what should be allowed in free speech.
Mm-hmm.
You may have to use some creativity that so far I haven't seen apparent in this group. But I would say that would be, I would say that's your responsibility. If you'd like my advice, I'd be happy to share it with you. And we have many members of our community who are extremely knowledgeable about constitutional law, about human values. I guess I would be one of those people you might want to consult. But it's clearly in your ballpark, you're the people who are going to ultimately have to at least institute some kind of measure. But what I am suggesting is there shouldn't be unlimited anything in our maybe air and oxygen, but outside of that, and maybe toleration and a couple of other things. But maybe unlimited education would be nice too. But generally speaking, any freedom can go awry. And as I'm sure you all know, there are limits to things like free speech that have been already legislated. You can't yell fire in a theater and not be prosecuted for it. That kind of stuff. Well, there clearly are other consequences to the policies that you have here. And one of them is the pain you're inflicting on people who actually have experienced the things that these invidious programs are displaying. and you're allowing that pain to occur in your community. I think it's a shame, and something that you could easily stop if you wanted to.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi Klein.
You're welcome.
Ray Spooner?
My name is Ray Spooner. I live 507 West Nevada in Urbana. I'm president of the Champaign-Urbana Jewish Federation, and in my capacity as such, I've never been wanting for people with opinions on what the Federation, its employees and board members should and should not be doing. So I don't envy your position. Obviously, you know which side of the issue I stand on with regards to the programming on UPTV. I know you sat through considerable and often heated debate from both sides of the fence regarding the programming. I just wanted to thank you for your time and patience, and I trust you'll carefully consider all sides presented and make the best decision. Thank you.
Next, Robert Silverman.
Hello, my name is Robert Silverman. I live at 501 South Cottage Grove in Urbana. This was a last-minute decision for me to speak. I'm the director of a nonprofit agency in Champaign called the Champaign County Operation Snowball, which is funded by the city of Urbana. I work with Jason at UPTV on a fairly regular basis as we're trying to develop local programming. I'm a little nervous here because you all are in the process of deciding how to spend social service funding, so I hope that my being here does not
it's okay.
reflect poorly on the organization of which I'm the director. But as I was listening, I find the irony of this interesting in that we work very hard to try to teach teenagers how not to talk the way that people talk that are on these programs. And the irony of that is something that we need to wrestle with, because it's what is called a double message. I work in the counseling field, and much of the work is spent helping people understand how to understand double messages. So, as I understand it, these programs are not limited. They're basically open to whoever sees them on television. I don't know how to stop teenagers from watching them, but we deal with anti-Semitic comments, we deal with racist comments, we deal with any group out there. I hear teenagers talk like that. And one of the things that we do on a regular basis is try to help them understand there are other ways to look at these issues. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I do want to state that I have two other individuals who want to be in the record but do not want to speak. Toby Shimkin, and she wants to speak in opposition of the current policy as it stands and procedure. And then also Michael Langendorf, and he wants to, for me to read what he has written here. Urbana is a nuclear-free zone and a Guatemalan refugee-free zone. It's time we are a hate-free zone. So those are the comments. I believe that is all. So I think now it's time for discussion. Brandon.
Yeah, and do you want us to take questions first and me to hold comments till later, or? Okay. I have first some questions and then I'll make a few comments. Thank you, Ron, for putting together the very detailed memo just for the public's understanding. There were a number of questions we asked 2 weeks ago after the last session. Thank you to those people who came with creative suggestions of ways the city could respond to the issue. I'd asked a lot of questions of Ron about whether some of them were legal, what the legal framework is, what things could work, and what the city could do. And Ron gave us a very detailed memo today, which we devoured. I have a couple follow-up questions based on that. The memo does answer that some of the things the public had suggested just plain doesn't work. That the hate speech ordinances are things that have been just not survived constitutional challenges in other cities. That weighting or ranking or letting citizens file paperwork to take shows off the air, that sort of majority rule framework doesn't work constitutionally. That the Illinois Human Rights Act, the Urbana Human Relations Ordinance, or just plain trying to sue for some kind of group defamation, that all of those legal remedies don't quite work. But I wanted to ask about a couple of the things people had suggested last week that might work and that are actions the city could take. There are four of them I wanted to briefly ask about. The first is about the suggestion to preface or kind of sandwich the hate speech with counter-programming. Could the city of Urbana could we identify that, okay, there's this show, it runs at 11 p.m., and that it it does have hate speech, and could we decide to run 30 minutes of programming before and after it that provides an alternative viewpoint? And I know Lee Malhado, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, suggested that some of the counter-programming that, like, when there are claims that the Holocaust didn't happen, there's counter-programming that explains the history of the Holocaust, but that those shows are expensive. It's maybe even something the city could invest in, is to license programming that's out there that's well done, to be able to run counter-programming to refute the arguments. So can the city run counter-programming before and after this sort of show, and is that one way within the legal framework the city can respond?
Absolutely. I see no reason whatsoever that the city can't make a decision that it wants to show a diversity of viewpoints. And in fact, Todd, you may want to speak. Todd Rent, our Human Relations Officer, is making some efforts in order to seek out and find some counter-programming that may be available to us in discovering what steps we may have to take to get permission to broadcast it.
Oh, go ahead. Todd, did you want to comment on that?
Sure. In the last few weeks, well, first of all, I would preface this by saying that we've, in the past several months, the Human Relations Commission has been working to develop public service announcements that have been intended to raise public awareness generally about the Human Relations Commission and the charge of the Human Rights Ordinance, and those PSAs have been developed. We're also in the process of working with an external organization to design and develop a billboard which basically talks about our community's commitment to diversity and inclusion in general. So those are just a couple of general statements. Specifically in regards to these videos, we've contacted organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center to request their partnership in identifying and licensing for broadcast videos that reflect Urbana's commitment to inclusion and diversity. So I anticipate over the next few weeks and maybe even several months working to identify additional resources for counter-programming, and actually would invite anyone from the public who has ideas in that area or who has that type of expertise as far as identifying these organizations to certainly contact my office. Now, also, in addition to that, I would say that I've been working over the past few weeks to develop additional ideas on generation of counter-programming here in the city of Urbana. You know, one of the things that we possibly could do, and this is just to begin the creative process, would be to sponsor some type of, the Human Relations Commission sponsor some type of contest for our young people, because this is really that's where the battle is. You know, that's what I'm hearing, is that we want to be able to engage our young people in a conversation that maybe at our generation we were never really able to effectively have, about race, about religion, and about all of these things that seem to be taboo. So we could certainly engage these young people, set up a contest where we offer a scholarship out of the Human Relations Commission budget that would give prize money to the person with the best video that, again, reflects the inclusiveness and diversity of the city of Urbana.
Brandon, continue with your line of
maybe I
questioning.
can just run through my four.
Could I ask a question about this particular question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, before we have 5 topics, could I explore this one? All right. I think that's useful information. I don't know. Maybe you can enlighten me about this question. Does the city have a duty to broadcast counter programming to freely given public programming on WPTV?
A legal duty, no.
A legal duty, no.
No, I mean, no, I can explain more, but you tell me.
I guess what I'm wondering is the city then going to be making true evaluations and judgments about the content of the public programming that we're looking at, and setting up counter programming to offset the imagined effect
that's perceived to be returning from the programming? And is this in some way manipulating public programming on the part of the city?
Well, there is the issue of deciding, well, what programming needs counter-programming. I mean, who vets that? And that is a question that I kind of get into in my memo to you all, is some of the practical issues of who gets to make this determination. Is it, it seems fairly obvious to most of us when you're talking about, some of these videos, which we're in the process of viewing all of them right now. They're repugnant and anti-Semitic and paranoid, but you get into a situation where there needs to be some line drawn, and which side a program is on in terms of that line becomes difficult. Minister Farrakhan, Louis Farrakhan, John Birch Society, Democracy Now!, Gay USA. There is an issue of determining what is appropriate, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, programming, and what is such that it needs counter-programming. But that is not such a problem, because you're not going to get into any legal issues about saying, well, we want to provide counter-programming, because the purpose of the public access channel, according to federal statute as well as most case law, is that it is to provide a diversity of public expression.
So my question really is, should the city be doing this, or should the city allow the community to do this, and then bracket the programming appropriately?
Well, in terms of the word "should" is a tricky.
Well, you're using the word "should" also.
I'm saying that there's a problem of determining, or who should determine that, make that decision. And my feeling is that I don't think that there is a legal issue with the city making that determination. My honest opinion is that that's more of a public policy issue. The more narrow or discrete question is, can we do it? Yes, we can. Who should decide that, and whether or not we should do it? Those are public policy issues. Todd may have an opinion on that as well.
Okay, Brandon.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the counter-speech ideas, the scholarship contest, all of that. That's a really good direction to go down. If I can, I'll just run through the rest of the 4 ideas, and then I'll sort of cede the floor here. The second one that I wanted to specifically ask about was the issue of moving things to a certain time slot. I know we already moved shows with nudity, offensive language, or excessive violence to past 11 p.m., and I wonder about the legality, as someone who asked tonight, of some criteria to determine these sorts of shows that might have hate speech in them and move them past a certain time slot.
This is also a tricky question, because obviously certain time slots are going to have more viewership than not, okay? Obviously, showing something at 5 p.m. On a weekday, there's likely to be more viewership of that program than at, say, 2 o'clock in the morning, okay? Even in a large college town. And the problem is that we run this public access channel, okay? It is run by the city, and therefore we become, in the eyes of the law, a state actor, okay? And if we make any regulation of protected speech that is not content neutral and not viewpoint neutral, we're doing it because we strictly have an animus towards or a disagreement with a particular political or religious viewpoint, there's a problem. And when I say there's a problem, I don't mean there's just this sort of ethereal philosophical problem. There's a legal problem. And what I've been reading is that if were to be legally challenged, it's not like, gunslingers facing off in the middle of a dusty road. There's probably, in all likelihood, we would lose. So there would be a colossal waste of time and money. And so my answer to your question is that if you're talking about moving certain programming that is declared so-called hate speech to 3 in the morning, because this council, UPTV commission, or the public finds the programming repugnant, it's going to be problematic.
Follow up on that? So how late can we make it?
Well, it's the same analysis. I mean,
It's been moved to 11 now. Can we move it to 12?
That move to 11, by the way, was voluntary. It was voluntary. We did not, UPTV Commission, nor Ms. Gorman, or any other government staff or body did not make that move.
What's the adult, or what's the federal, adult, or, they have a time period where you're supposed to have it after a certain hour?
I couldn't.
8 or 9, I think, on network TV.
How late is it?
I couldn't tell you.
I'm afraid I don't know precisely.
And to the extent that it tends to be involved with things of graphic sexual or violent content as opposed to something that is politically or religiously considered controversial or extreme.
Brandon.
The third idea I wanted to ask about briefly was just the idea that any single submitter who brings a show into the station would be limited in the number of times they could show shows, so that no individual citizen of Urbana could hog the airwaves, or that to submit a show you have to have 5 or 10 signatures of support, so that it's clear when you're bringing a show that there's at least a couple people out there in the community who want to watch it. Are those ideas, they weren't specifically covered in the memo, are those ideas things that we already have, things that are legal? How do those fit into the framework?
Let me separate those out, because I hear two suggestions. There's one about limiting the number of times that a video can be shown, and Ms. Gorman can correct me, but I believe we already do that.
That a single submitter could show any show. That if I'm Brandon, I couldn't show 300 shows a year. Any single submitter would be limited in the number of times they could submit different shows.
Again, they're based on the same logic that I used, which is that if some courts would consider this public access channel to be a designated public forum, again, if you're making any of these decisions and they are based on content or viewpoint, the answer is no. You cannot do that. There are these narrow exceptions that appellate courts and the U.S. Supreme Court have carved out for government prescribing speech or expression. They are obscenity, they are defamation, and the so-called fighting words. And these videos do not fall within those narrow exceptions. And, if you want, I can go into further explanation about those various categories, but suffice it to say, for this particular question, it does not fall in those. So when you talk about having sort of this model where someone has to prove that there are a number of citizens who want to see it, if you're doing it because we don't like these videos and we want to try to present some hurdles to an individual from showing certain videos, that may be problematic. And it sort of gets back to that analysis that I made about majority rule or having groups. The phrase I like to use is you have to be careful about the tyranny of the majority, and you don't ask 3 foxes and a lamb what's going to be for dinner. It's going to be problematic. So.
And my last question was just about whether or not this memo is something that could be released publicly. It was very helpful. It was very helpful to read about hate speech ordinances and them being overturned in other cities and things. And I know to all those people who've come and asked these last 2 weeks for hate speech ordinances and for a number of these other solutions, to really answer them, I think, is needed to somehow explain the legal framework, explain our legal research so far. So can we share this memo or make a public version of it?
Yes. Yes. I
As
don't
well-
know how much I can say now because we're in a public forum, but yes, I will discuss it with you.
As
after
well
the
as the
meeting.
research that you did?
Yes. Yes. I would just typically want to know ahead of time when I'm writing a memo for public consumption.
Charlie and then Danielle.
Ron, I think whenever you read us a memo, consider it for public consumption first.
Well, now I will.
I know you're new, so, yeah, as open as possible, and that was one of my questions. A couple of things, specifically, the issue, I don't see where in any of this we couldn't say require 10 citizens to support a particular program. That's not an onerous requirement, but it shows that there's some support.
It's not about it being necessarily onerous or can it be done or not. To answer that question and really get into it, I have to back up a little bit and talk about the Cable Communications Policy Act 1984. Basically, in that act, Congress specified that municipalities could, as a condition of granting a franchise to a cable operator, require this sort of this PEG channel model, or channels, as the case may be. And the idea was that Congress wanted to allow municipalities to require these cable operators to provide access to the media that for the public, because I'm sorry, contrary to what one gentleman suggested, the idea was that the average person cannot buy a commercial channel, cannot afford to have a video camera, purchase an expensive video camera and broadcast over commercial TV his or her viewpoints. And so when you think about the purposes behind Congress providing these cities with a mechanism, doesn't mean that we have to ask for a public access portion. For example, Champaign just has the egg of the PEG. They have the education government. But think about it in these terms. What if, for example, before we allowed anyone to picket in front of City Hall, we said, you have to go get signatures from 10 citizens that say that they agree with your viewpoint before we'll allow you to peaceably march in front of City Hall or some other public square? You could see in that scenario it would be a much more controversial decision, and we would probably all be appalled at that requirement. Well, for purposes of analysis of First Amendment law, it's the same. It's just that streets and the public square and sidewalks have been considered what the courts call traditional public forum, and public access arguably is a designated public forum. I hope that answers your question.
Danielle. Oh.
I have a couple more. Sorry. A couple of issues have been raised. One will be a question for Kate in a second. One of the issues raised was moving to local programming only. We had a brief conversation about this. Have you given that any more thought?
We could attempt that, but here's the problem now. Because of this ongoing controversy and this debate, this rather vigorous debate, now all the things that we would attempt to do could be suspect, in the sense that courts will look at legislative, legislative purpose to determine why did you do what you did, okay? And if it's an improper legislative purpose, meaning there was an attempt to prescribe speech, meaning you decided to take only local programming for the sole purpose of preventing outside third-party videos that have content that or viewpoint that you find objectionable, that would be problematic in the court. When I say problematic, I mean that action would probably fail if challenged.
Charlie, one more question.
And then the question for Kate would be, can you address Lee Malhato's comments about the form that people fill out has one thing, but the procedures where you have some other materials and how those two mesh?
Yes, of course. Right now, we have been trying to adopt as many of the suggestions made by the UPTV Commission in the revised policies and procedures, and that included the form that Ms. Mulholland brought up. That is one of the new parts of the revised policies and procedures that is not technically adopted yet. And that's part of the reason that I feel that it's very important for these to become adopted so that we'll be able to have consistent regulations for all of our members to be able to follow. And then we would also be able to address those issues with the violations, because major violations also include falsifying forms. And if they filled out the form mentioned incorrectly or did not notify us of any of the violations or any of the obscene material that they possessed, that would be considered a major violation. And then they would have an immediate 90-day suspension of all membership. And if it wasn't, if it was deemed to be an even greater misstep or violation, then they could be suspended for an entire year. And these are different violations, major violations listing than in the previous, or the current, I guess I should say, the current policies and procedures. So that's part of the reason that these revised policies do need to be accepted, so that we can have a continuity between the forms that we are asking people to fill out and honor, as well as following the policies and procedures that are currently on the books.
Danielle, I believe you're next, then Robert.
Thanks. I just want to point out to the Committee of the Whole that the policies, the policy changes that we have in front of us are kind of narrow in relation to the conversation, and they take steps, if we pass them, and I suggest that we do, they take steps to favor local programming over third party. They limit city liability. They clarify sponsorship and responsibilities, such as filling out the forms. There's a lot of things that we have learned from this process that we're able to move forward with at this point. And so I think that it's actually in the interest of all of the speakers who have spoken this evening to take a step in the right direction, and that this does that. The second is I want to speak to the issue of third-party programming, and I don't see its removal as a viable option. Not only was I on council, and I think I was the only person on council at the time when over 1,000 people signed a petition asking for Democracy Now! To be put on. There was a fairly significant fight with the former mayor. It became an election issue. In the next election, it was one of the issues that came up. And so it's there's this and Gay USA and some of the other ones, but there's a couple of programs that are really beloved by the community. And I think that we have to weigh the consequences if we were to take third party. The second thing is I want us to look at what public access means, because public access doesn't actually mean the ability to produce. Even a lot of the speakers have spoken about how much time and energy, how much time and energy it takes to produce video. If you look at public access stations, it's the ability to put things on the air for other people to benefit from, or to shove them down the throats, or to make a scene, various reasons. I think in this case it's clearly an attention-getting thing from what I understand of this particular person, and they're getting a whole lot of attention, and they're actually watching me on the television right now. And I know because he calls me and tells me that he's watching, and you know, this is the most attention that this man has gotten, and it's sick, and this is a self-satisfying gesture on his part, and I really wish that there was some way we could say, you know, hey, you're hurting people doing this, and let's see if we can get some positive attention in your direction instead of the negative attention that you're getting from this, which seems to be the only attention that you're getting. So that might be one way to address this situation. But the other thing is that what happens is that people put things on like the Sierra Club, and then they send out emails to all of the Sierra Club members, and they say, Sierra Club, we're going to talk about, you know, compact fluorescents and how they have mercury and the effects on the environment. And then they email all their friends and the Sierra Club members, and then people watch in, and I get these emails frequently. This happens a lot. It's part of public access. I'll also point out that WEFT, which is not government-sponsored, controlled public access, but WEFT, a community radio station, 99% of the content is third-party. It's not locally produced. There's a couple of local bands. I used to be part of doing local news content. It took 30 hours to produce 30 minutes. So it's it really did. It's a huge burden to do that. But WEFT, which is considered public access, is actually spinning tunes for your friends, pulling off Democracy Now!, Free Speech Radio News. That's what public access means. So I want us to consider that. I strongly believe, and I've been pushing this for a while, that public access should have its own station, a different number, not UPTV 6, but a different number, to clarify that this is the public speaking. It's not government. So I disagree that this is a city issue. I think hate speech is a community issue, and I think that the community, all of us included, need to be part of the conversations about this, and that the city is the steward of the venue, but that's really different than the city is putting this on, the city is endorsing. I disagree with those statements. I understand people's feelings are hurt. I understand what it's like to have beer bottles thrown at you because of your sexual orientation, in my case. I understand what hate crimes look like. I've been a victim of hate crimes, and it's not the case that the city is endorsing this kind of speech. I completely and utterly object to that claim. I do not endorse the speech that Tim Brumleve or any of these pastors, I don't endorse the hate speech that the religious organizations put on that insinuate that gay people molest children. I don't endorse that speech, and I don't think that the city is endorsing that speech. So I think that if we had a third party, if we had an independent station, that would not change the free speech issue. It would still be a public venue, but I think that it would clarify that this is not the city talking, because people see city programming and then all of a sudden they see this. And so it's confusing and it looks like the city is talking. So the franchise is up for the cable operator. We're in the process of negotiations, and I strongly urge you to support going to have a separate channel, and it's going to require cooperation with U of I and the city of Champaign, and we need to be discussing that cooperation. I have considered the possibility of sponsors appearing before and after their programming, because there was a statement I took to heart that said, about, well, if someone's on the street, I can engage them in dialogue, but if they're, broadcasting this, I can't. It's not entirely true, because their information is public, and that has been clarified, and people can call Tim Brumleve up and they can have this conversation with him, and I have talked to him in the past, and he stopped putting this on the air for 7 months after we had a conversation. It's possible that we can continue to engage him in this conversation, but I do think that having that physical visibility might add something. On the other hand, I think, well, what if it's a transgendered person? The whole concept of transgendered is new, and you're asking them to put themselves out there in that way. So I am up in the air on that issue, but I did start talking about that with Kate. I do think that we should drown this out with diverse educational programming. And I urge everyone who's listening to submit tapes to UPTV, so that there is so much going on and there's so many things happening and there's diverse educational programming from lots of points of view, that it drowns this out. And that's how I've handled hate speech directed at me in the past, and that's how I think this is one strategy that we can use to address this. I am interested in the guidelines for what and when to show, particularly the when part, and thinking about right now, the guidelines are whoever wants, as long as it's not indecent, as we understand to be sexually indecent, and obscene, which we understand to be sexually obscene, which I disagree with, actually. I didn't write those federal laws, but, someone showing a breast, I think, is really different than I'd rather see that than this kind of stuff on television. But I think that but I think that we can look into what our alternatives are for how we structure programming that is content neutral. So, for example, is there some way in which we can assess the programming regardless of content, or can we assess the programming not in terms of the specific content but generalities around the content, like you know, who's programming the station? Well, according to the policies and procedures, it's the city administration. That's who programs, not even the UPTV Commission. So then the question is there a way for the city administration to decide not whether something goes on, but what the overall guidelines are? Like, we as a city prioritize these particular goals, and therefore we're going to give precedence during the prime time to things that meet these goals. So larger scale things, that's a question I have. I'm also interested in how the internet is starting to use voting or weighting of stories so that the stories are all there, but the flotsam and jetsam really settles to the bottom, and the stuff that people are interested in gets moved to the top through a voting process. And so I'd be interested in seeing how we might be able to explore something like that. So these are some of the issues that we can look at. That's what I have to say.
Robert, then I'm going to call him myself.
I don't know if you were asking rhetorical questions, or did you want me to actually address
I think most...
I'm just asking.
In particular, the piece I would direct at you is the last piece, which has to do with, can we set city goals and say these are the priorities we have in terms of programming with broad strokes, and then fit that, because every other station, the NPR stations, even WEFT, and I know they're not all public access, but they all have some priorities in terms of their programming about when they put things on. And so I feel like we should be looking at that and seeing what are the guidelines that we could establish to making program decisions about time in particular.
Just very briefly, I would have to look and see the particulars of whatever model you were talking about, but I can just tell you that it's dangerous ground you're on in terms of whether or not it would survive a constitutional challenge. And it's very difficult for me as a black man to sit here and try to explain the law of First Amendment that vindicates the type of videos that vindicates the right to show or have aired these types of videos. And I have spent a considerable amount of time doing a lot of mental gymnastics to try to come up with playing what if. That's not only me in my office in front of doing legal research, but also in talking with Mr. Rent, whose opinion I value greatly. I have not been able to come up with a model either through the case law that I've seen or what I've read so far that other communities do that I feel would survive a constitutional challenge. Now, does that mean that it can't be done? No. And does that mean that a city cannot make certain programming decisions that are content and viewpoint neutral? No. I'm just saying that it has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Robert.
You put me in a very precarious spot.
Yes. Welcome to my world.
Yes. I am concerned about our children and the exposure that they receive, not only from a time standpoint, but as well content, and how it can adversely affect them. Based on what I've seen in the schools today, this only exacerbates the problem that I see. I would be curious to know, what would it take for a constitutional challenge? To have, let me clarify, have this, quote, public access television select what they really want. What would it take? What kind of programming? let's say we had a committee from the community that decided they wanted programming of whatever type, and they can exclude or include whatever they wanted, what would it cost the city to challenge that? You don't have to answer it now.
Thank you. That's a large question. I would need a lot of time to sit and do, done a tremendous amount of research, but you're coming at the question a little bit differently. Most of the time it's like, well, can we do this, can we do that? And those are easier questions versus, well, what can we do to accomplish this? It's very difficult. I mean, again, there is a strong argument that these public access channels are considered a designated public forum. And it's much like, you know, and I hate to keep making this analogy, but it's an apt one. It's much like trying to say, well, how can we control who pickets in front of City Hall? Can we jackhammer the sidewalk so nobody can do it? Can we put up barricades so only certain people can get through? You know, when you look at these questions, if you take it out of the context of a public access channel and look at it in more traditional public forums and ask the same question, you see the difficulties of trying to make that determination. In terms of controlling programming, there have been two schools of thoughts with regard to public access channels. One is that you can't do anything. It's a public access channel. It's like the sidewalk. It's like the public forum. It's the market. It's the soapbox out in the marketplace. You have to let the people in the community determine what it is they want to see. Now, there's another idea that I don't think is as legally strong, which is that you can make content and viewpoint neutral decisions. Okay? So what are those? I don't know. Got to hear it first. You know, I mean, and I'm not the arbiter. It's the trier of fact. The trier of fact, meaning the judge or the jury, if it got challenged, who have to determine, you know, is something obscene? Is something fighting words? Or is it defamatory? And absent a trier of fact or a court answering a question of law, it would be difficult for me to come up front with a model and say, I think absolutely this would work in all circumstances. I'd have to hear it first, but I can try, but not right now.
Well, the suggestion I would have, since we're just acting stewards of this for the public, and what I'm hearing from the public is that we want you to act in a responsible way. Now, if we are good stewards, then we must think outside that box. And whatever that soapbox is, we got to think outside of it and try to come up with a reasonable forum that will satisfy, first of all, the community. Now, once we establish that for the community, then we determine whether or not we're going to be challenged legally.
I'm respectfully and humbly, I think that's incorrect. I think that this is frequently, I've listened to the comments not only here but at UPTV Commission meetings, and there's some, I don't think it's always intentional, but there's some times a move towards making this issue a value judgment, or that this decision is reflective of the values of the city. And my approach has not been a value-based judgment, because at the end of the day, the court doesn't really care about our values. I've looked at this strictly from what will work legally, okay? So you usually cannot make the analysis of, here's what I want, now let's talk about whether or not it will be challenged. Usually you have to look at, what does the law say we can and cannot do, and then based on those parameters, you decide how can we work within that legal framework. Okay?
This is what I see. Okay, we've come up with a whole series of guidelines and specific criteria that we want to establish. We've done that. Okay. Can we tighten it to the point where we're at the edge? Okay.
You take risk.
And take the risk. I mean, if we get challenged, fine.
You want, as your acting city attorney, if you want my most honest decision, that's not anything that I would advise you to do. I would be remiss if I told you, go ahead and do that. Let's just see what happens. And there may be some things sometimes where if I might say, you know what, it's not clear. You know, this is a gray area of law, and, you know, there seems to be a division among the appellate circuits, and, you know, we could go down that route. But First Amendment law, the depth and breadth of the law, the case law that is out there now, it would be hard to pass the straight face test, to stand in front of a federal judge and attempt to argue that some of the suggestions that have been made, we had a good faith belief that they were legal. It would be difficult. Some things may be more than others, but most of what I have heard right now is it's brilliant creative thinking, and it's illegal.
Yes, sir.
May I call on myself? It's at the pleasure of the council. Thank you. I think it seems like, you know, we've chosen to be a PEG, right? A PEG. And it's the P part that causes us to not be in a situation where we have a lot of tools to prevent this type of thing from happening, it appears. Because obviously we've asked a lot of questions. We've been very inquisitive, you know, because it seems like our heart, our spirit, we want to stop that type of thing to be seen. And, you know, just from my perspective, and I'm sure I'm not in the majority, but I'd rather be just the egg and not the peg. Because frankly, I think that we choose to be the peg, and therefore we are the vehicle for this type of language, for this type of programming. We can't help it. I agree with people when they say it's free speech. Absolutely. You know, and you've described it well. But I think my trouble with it is that as a City of Urbana member, as a taxpayer, as somebody, you know, if you paid Comcast, you know, you're a part of this. And I kind of feel a part of it. I mean, you know, if you got trash in your yard, even though it's not your trash, it looks bad, you know, and I'm all about picking it up, even though it's not my trash. And I feel like these things that are being shown, even though we put all kinds of disclaimers on them, and I can see a lot of effort has been put into how can we minimize this? How can we mitigate, you know, what's happening out there with this? Obviously, people care about it, but it's not going to do it. And as long as our name is on it, I feel as a taxpayer that I'm participating in it. And to me, if we're an egg and we do the education and we do the government programming, I like that. That's comfortable for me. You know what? Many years ago when PEG started, there was not the proliferation of the Internet. My goodness, there is so much availability for people now to put out all kinds of stuff that they want to, totally under the auspices of free speech. Hey, great, that's awesome. Go for it. You know, and you know, I think programming like WAFT, I mean, that's wonderful. If there was a TV thing that was, you know, could be done, you know, commercially or not for profit but private, great. But I think you know, and Danielle, I mean, you said something that's true. You mean you want to balance things. And sometimes I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are a lot of good public programs on our channel that you hate to see go away. But I think in this case, it may be worth it. Dennis.
By the way, I wanted to address the issue about websites, making the analogy of websites and our public access channels. It's very, very important to remember that websites typically are privately owned, like YouTube and others like that. So the whole voting thing and flagging videos, the difference is We're government. We're state actors. The law of First Amendment is completely different. A commercial entity, a NBC or HBO or YouTube or whatever can do within certain parameters anything they want because they own it. This is different.
Dennis?
Lynn, your viewpoint, I understand it, but it worries me very tremendously. I think that the city, we've already established that the city merely provides the vehicle, the forum, the PEG channel through the franchise agreement. We are coordinating that effort for the public good so that the public can bring to the open forum any manner and all manner of material to share and to enrich the lives of the people who are here. We don't pre-select only the goody-good stuff. We are strong, we are knowledgeable, or we can become knowledgeable by understanding and incorporating and absorbing unusual viewpoints into our lives. Is it true that we should only eat mashed potatoes and steak? Or should we try Thai food occasionally, or Chinese food, or Vietnamese food when we eat? Are we only comfortable? Lynn, what you said is that you would accept things that made you feel comfortable. That is comfortable for me. Yes, I like to be comfortable as well.
No, I didn't say that I would accept things that would be comfortable.
You said that by dropping the P of the PEG would make you feel comfortable.
As a city, I do not
Okay.
think that we need to do that. Many cities choose not to.
That's right.
Many.
All right, but actually Urbana has had a reputation for being forward-thinking, supporting the widest range of public discussion. There's been a discussion here in the newspaper about where's democracy in Urbana. Isn't democracy the inclusion of every possible viewpoint without stifling other people's viewpoint because you don't abide by them? And then I wonder then also, what's the empowerment of a television program? How does it affect you individually? Yes, we might feel hurt. It might insult us. But does that then therefore damage us? What I wonder is, where is the strength of the human spirit to be able to not to justify, but to determine and use right discrimination when it is viewing or listening to someone else speak? Let's say that that's not on a television set, but I'm sitting across the table from you. And if I engage you in a conversation and you really disagree with it, does that mean that I've now defined you for the rest of your life? No. You say, man, I really disagree with it. That guy's crazy. You are not diminished in any sense of the term because you know who you are. Yes, you disagree with them. Just because a man sits behind a desk and holds up various books and papers and says this is what he thinks, or he'll say this is it. Does that mean that we all agree with it, or that we're fooled by a person who is substantiating most of his argument by his own newsletters? I watched the program about the Illuminati from Mars. I wasn't impressed in the least by this gentleman. But I'm surprised by what weight of seriousness he's affecting the learned community that's before me, as if his words were so correct and so powerful that they totally overwhelmed your own beingness, your own state of reality, as if his words were really more important than your own consciousness in your mind. And they so upset you that you wanted to stifle that conversation. I totally agree that I didn't agree with anything that he said, and he didn't substantiate hardly anything except he held up some books and some newspaper clippings. Now, is that the basis for Is that such a learned presentation that we must just choke it off? We can't stand to have it in our community. This community is so far above that in terms of its ability to understand and dialogue. And so therefore, I actually support Danielle's comments. And that is that what this city needs is not less PEG, but more PEG. We need a greater and wider and more inactive public dialogue. And I would agree that perhaps it shouldn't be housed in the city building, that it should have its own studio. I would take the most forward and aggressive stand on the franchise agreement bargaining that we can take and truly liberate the people's dialogue of Urbana and bring real democracy into this community by having a studio that all the community, the disadvantaged, the uneducated, the disenfranchised, could come and easily receive help in producing locally owned and locally created and locally imagined and locally creative programming presentations, whether they be on the arts and music or philosophy or spiritual insight or training dogs or whatever it would be, and flood the airways of public television with creative, positive creation that comes from ourselves. And let's let the people who have really odd ideas, and we don't believe them anyways, let's not give them the power to control our lives through fear. Let's totally ignore that. Let's just turn off the channel. Just turn your set off and go about and put on a Bach sonata or something, all right? In other words, take control of your lives. But don't stifle freedom of speech.
Danielle?
I'd like to make a motion that we move the changes to the public access policies and procedure manual to council next week with a recommendation for approval.
Is there
I second that.
Okay, there's been a motion by Danielle, second by Dennis. Any other?
And I actually speak to that. I actually have already spoken. I think this is the step in the right direction, and we have the documentation before us to talk about the changes. Nothing that we're doing with this motion is a step backwards. I will say, though, on the issue of public access, because I feel so strongly about what you said, Lynn, is that, I just feel like this is the decay of society is when a single person can destroy a public amenity. That's when the decay starts. And I urge the council members to look at the data of what the public has said, what the broad people of Urbana, the residents of Urbana have said. And we just did a survey with our leading up to our franchise negotiations. So we have really great, independent, accurate data about what the public said. And what the public said in this survey was overwhelmingly they support public access. In the 75, 80th percentile, they support public access. And the majority of them, even though we charge the maximum amount for public access, they said that they would pay more than they pay currently to support public access. I was surprised by that. Majority of people said, fine, we not only love public access, we'll pay more for public access. This was specifically about public access. So in that documentation, we talked about all the organizations that use public access. So if we shut off public access, you need to tell the Center for Women in Transition, the Urban League, the Safe House for Women, all these different churches in the organization, the Sierra Club, the university. You have to tell all these people, we're turning it off. You've been using it, and there's, dozens and dozens of nonprofits. Nonprofits do not have access to the airwaves. They cannot buy billboards. They cost $2,500 in this town. They cannot buy advertisement, which is $1,000 for like 4 seconds, because I recently had to buy it. I could not believe how much corporate commercial advertising was. They do not have access. Their only access to the community is through our public access channel, and then through the listers and things. But in terms of television, that's it. And so they rely on this. This is important. And to take this away from them is to take something away that is worth tens of thousands of dollars for each of them. And so I really think that it's important for you to look at the number of signatures in support of public access, the organizations that use it, and the survey data of the public. And I'd be happy to condense that information and send it in a one-pager to the committee. But I think this conversation about killing public access, we need to know our information first before we take anything like that seriously.
Okay, there's been a motion and a second. And Charlie, you wanted to comment also?
Yeah. Who's next?
Charlie, you're next.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, I have a rhetorical question, but first a real question for Kate. In reading through the proposals, proposed changes, what happens if there are no time slots available? How does, suppose there is a lot of local, could you explain the new procedures for weighing local versus third party, and what happens when all the time slots are in use?
If all of the time slots are in use, are you talking before or after a specific program, or in?
Yeah, just say, there's enough programming out there that everything is full, that there are no more time slots available. What happens as you fill up?
Well, then we would accept applications for people who would be interested in submitting programming, and then essentially they would need to wait until a member who is currently producing programming to either cancel their program or to lapse in providing new episodes for that program.
So first come, first serve.
It is a first come, first serve.
Okay.
Dennis?
Okay, well, no, my second, I'll just make a comment here. One of the first places I turned to this, and I'm really tired of the hate speech, the lies, the distortions, but that I can say the same thing about Bill Riley. And, yeah, or Rush Limbaugh, yeah, which is even worse. Yeah. The thing is, one of the best websites I came across was that provided by the ADL. And I don't want to quote too much from it because there's a lot of context here, but they state that they believe the best response to the words of bigots and extremists is more speech, and speech that reflects the ideals of American democracy and tolerance. So as this moves forward, I think the best thing we can do is come up with counter-programming and such. And so my request to staff is to come up with some additional, what exactly do you propose doing, and can you have it ready next week with some general ideas of where we will go to, assuming that this policy passes, where will we go to extend the ideas that Todd raised earlier?
When you say staff, are you asking a legal question, or I think Todd? I think he's referring to you.
I will not meet with the Human Relations Commission until I believe it's I should know this, the second Wednesday in the month of May. At that point, I plan to present a proposal to them. And again, this is something that we are going to have to pull in some resources for. We're going to have to pull in some community resources. Honestly, the response that I've gotten from the agencies that I have contacted so far has not been overwhelmingly positive. They've been very cooperative, but as I think was mentioned last week, there are times when even not-for-profit organizations require substantial costs for licensing programs for broadcast. So I think that this is going to be a long-term project, and it's going to require some commitment from the city. It's going to require some commitment from the Human Relations Commission. I just wanted to address one other question before as to whether or not it's really our duty to produce this. From a legal standpoint, I can't talk to that, but I can say that one of the reasons I chose to come here and chose to work here is because the nature of my job is to try and advocate for and push for and encourage the creation of a community that includes everyone and that respects everyone's right to exist and to prosper and to live together in this community. So as far as my office is concerned and the direction that I believe that I've gotten, I believe that it is a role that we can play, and I would consider it a duty of my office to take this on and to provide programming, or at least to source out counter-programming that reflects the inclusive and diverse commitment that we have in our city.
Dennis?
I only had one question to ask you concerning the proposal, and that was the policy that's on the 5th page that under the headline "Policy for Establishing Technical Requirements for UPTV's Archive."
Oh, are you looking at the condensed memo version, not the, okay.
The policy for the UPT policies and procedures comparison document.
Yes.
And on the 5th page, policies for establishing technical requirements for UPTV's archive.
Yes.
And what it says is the revised policies, section 3.9 states, so this is what you're proposing.
Yes.
Programs may be submitted in the following formats: DVD, live, or satellite.
Yes.
So it occurred. So first of all, there's a couple things that occurred to me here. First of all, I don't understand why you're totally dropping VHS, because there's a lot of public programming that's still in a VHS format, even though I know we're in transition.
Well, we're not actually dropping that as a possibility.
A possibility?
Right, exactly. We have the equipment to be able to make it possible to transfer VHS to DVD. So it's then would be incumbent upon the person who is submitting the footage to make the transfer, which we would provide them with the equipment to do that.
But it sounds like you're actually not accepting VHS format. I think you need to have wording saying something about conversion of VHS format to DVD, not because sounds like it's excluded now. All right?
Right.
And the second thing is that obviously we're depending upon third-party production of programming if we're receiving it by satellite.
We do receive two blocks of educational programming by satellite, in addition to several public access shows by satellite.
And it's not locally created, is it?
No, it is not.
It could not possibly be, could it?
No.
Okay, so therefore, we don't want to limit our programming just to locally produced, because it would be totally taking out blocks of time of public television as it occurs now.
Yes, as well as educational programming.
That's right. But I really do think that you need to somehow indicate in the policy how VHS programming that's being received by the channel needs to be converted, and that you have a way of doing it or assisting the individuals to do it.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, and there's been a second. Is there further discussion? Do you want to make an amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to make a friendly amendment that we include a policy that allows the individuals submitting programming to understand how to convert VHS programming to the DVD if it's required.
I would take that as a friendly amendment instead of having to do an additional amendment.
Everyone comfortable with that?
So you could bring some language to council next week that would clarify that, and then
I could bring a substitute page to be able to insert to the new policies and procedures.
That sounds fine. Okay, I think we're ready for a vote. All those in favor of moving this forward to council next week with a recommendation for approval indicate by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? I'd say nay, but if you want me to say nay, I'll say nay. Nay. But I am the chairman. So. Okay, we now have another item, but hey, are we ready to go? 3-minute break. Okay, we're going to gather everyone together. Good night, Julia.
3 minutes is up.
Everyone want to go ahead and take their seat. City council persons, thank you so much. Okay, let's gather. We're ready for the next item on the agenda. And the agenda item is item number 9, ordinance number 2008-04-030, an ordinance establishing a sustainability advisory commission for the city of Urbana, Illinois. And I'd like to turn it over to our mayor.
Why is everybody leaving? This is a really big issue, guys, you know.
They got fed up with the last.
Yeah, right. This is really a huge issue, and we have a lot of people in Urbana that I think would be very valuable to advise us, and so that's why I'm suggesting that we create an advisory commission on sustainability. And I'd like to see the focus on water and energy in particular. I mean, there's a lot of ways of looking at this, but I don't think we should get bogged down in details. I think that this advisory commission could certainly advise us on where to start. But the staff has been working on this, so I think we need to approach it from a lot of fronts. The staff will give a report. And I've been asked, is this just for the city or is it for the people who live in the city? Obviously, everybody needs some kind of way to discuss this, and we can figure out what the best approach is. But a lot of cities are dealing with this, and Urbana certainly needs to deal with it. So that's why I drew it up.
Okay, thank you. Do we want to turn it over to Anna for any discussion, or?
They're doing their report. They're not discussing this particular ordinance.
Okay, so let's discuss the ordinance. Dennis.
Okay, there's, of course, the whole concern of utilities and increasing utility bills and, sustainable water resources for the future, how to be smart thinking, just managing our own lights and gasoline and, equipment here in the city, all need to be discussed, and these are things that are the challenges of all Americans for the future. So I support this idea. I wonder if the mayor could tell me if this is going to be focused specifically on Urbana, or do you see this commission working county-wide with other with the county or Champaign, or is this mainly the city of Urbana bottom line kind of task force?
Well, I would think it's to start with Urbana, but to get things done, we obviously have to cooperate with other people, but I think I just want some Urbana citizens to advise us, and I'm sure that when we work on issues of water and energy, we will have to work with other governments.
Danielle?
I'd like to make a motion to establish a Sustainability Advisory Commission for the City of Urbana, Illinois.
Is there a second? Seconded by Brandon.
Very brief comment, because of the lateness of the hour. I applaud the mayor for being a cool mayor, and initiating this is totally within our goals, and it converges with a lot of our other goals, and I think that we absolutely need to tap the talent in our community in many ways, and this is one of the ways that we'll tap their talent. And in particular, I'm hoping that this will go in the direction of, and some of the documentation both Brandon and Anna have provided, of setting goals and setting reasonable expectations to achieve those goals. And I really do think that it's going to be the cities in this country that take on climate change, and I think that's been apparent for a while. I think the states and the federal government will follow, but it's going to be the cities that do it first. So I applaud Urbana moving in this direction.
Are we ready for a vote? Charlie? Okay.
I was going to point out that it's very similar to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, or Commission. I know that Brandon chairs that, which is a nice addition, and includes city staff, so it's got a little broader base of membership. I don't know if you want to consider something like that, where city staff and or members of other agencies are on the board, or the advisory commission.
It doesn't preclude that. It just says 7 people. They could be staff or not staff. I think it might be nice to bring in some more people because our staff is already working on it.
Okay, all those in favor of moving this forward to council next week indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that carries. Next, I think we'll hear from Anna Hochhalter on Sustainable Urbana.
Good evening. I'll be brief. I'll just let you know that we prepared a large update for you, and we wanted to include a wide range of materials to assist in this planning endeavor that is about to occur. So we took the August 2007 Sustainable Urbana report and provided further context on plans that the city has already adopted, which include or address sustainability and environmental concerns in some way, and expanded on the history of Urbana's involvement in sustainability efforts and environmental natural resource concerns. We updated some of the accomplishments, and we also provided more context on sustainability as a concept and provided examples of goals and plans that are used throughout the world by municipalities when they grapple with these same issues of natural resource consumption and planning for a sustainable future. And I'll just point out that typically when using the term sustainability, there are three aspects that are included: the economy, the environment, and society. And looking at using a linkages view, you look at the nexus of those three goals or considerations to find the best solution in those three areas. And in the report, in the updated report, we've explained objectives that were described in the 2007 report in terms of some of the general goals and principles of sustainability. And in attempting to prepare a strategic plan for sustainability, we realized that we need more direction, that doing so requires significant consideration of long-term consequences, and we would really hope for a systematic approach. So we're looking for some direction on how to proceed in really integrating the concept of sustainability into operational procedures, and then also to decide to what extent this is included as a community-wide effort. So I guess I should clarify to say that the large report that was given to you is not yet a strategic plan, despite the footnote that was, I apologize that was there. We're calling this an approach towards strategic planning because it's not at the point yet of being a strategic plan. It's a preliminary document that provides a lot of groundwork and a lot of examples of what other cities are doing, and also example handbooks and planning guides, both by the American Planning Association, by the Illinois Green Government Coordinating Council. We provided a handbook on urban sustainability by the National Research Council in Canada, and towards a sustainable community toolkit for local governments created by authors in the University of Wisconsin Extension Agency. So with that, I'll take questions.
Brandon?
I hope comments are okay too. Well, maybe the first one, could you briefly describe and tell people, especially those still viewing at home, about this thing that every resident probably received in the mail lately?
This is an impressive brochure that was produced by Public Works, so I'm not sure if I'm the best one to speak about it. However, I will say that it's an introduction to the concept of natural resource management and looking at ways that you, as a resident, can minimize the impact on the environment. And it explains a lot about the recycling program, describing what materials are collected, which materials aren't collected by the use cycle, where you can drop off recycling items to be recycled, how you can save energy, touches on local food.
I exchanged some email with Rod Fletcher today and complimenting him on it, and he answered back that this piece was mailed to 19,000 households in the city, residential and multifamily alike. Originally it was targeted for promoting U-Cycle, but he thought it was a good time to also introduce sustainability, recycling, and other program relationships. So I think if Rod's the author, and Rod and his staff, really, it's a wonderful piece.
Mm-hmm. Great. Brandon?
Okay, the comment I wanted to briefly add was I sent out some supplemental information to all of you, and staff got it too. I just wanted to very briefly, I left it on your desks, tell you just a couple summary points. Oh, here's another copy of you. There's one. I just wanted to say 3 quick things. First, this is wonderful. Let's move ahead. I think the Commission can start with this strategic planning process, and all the documents, Anna, that you and the team provided are really helpful towards this strategizing. There's 3 things that I wanted to sort of add as comments and recommendations. The first is there's a program called Cities for Climate Protection. Cities are really leading the way. The state and federal government is lagging behind, and cities are the ones making change. And this group, Cities for Climate Protection, is one that Chicago, Madison, Ann Arbor, Minneapolis, this whole list I've given here, of cities participate in. And it's local governments, a lot like us, here nearby, working on this exact issue. And so I think the group could consider, I'd recommend the Commission consider us joining that process. Second, we have to act strategically. There's a couple statistics here, and I would ask and recommend that the Commission look at some of the statistics so that we can leverage and do the things to get the most bang for our buck and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions the most. Transportation is a huge area. It accounts for about 33% of greenhouse gas emissions, and the city can really affect that. Buildings are a huge area, and the city can really affect buildings. And lastly, the governmental sector, there's a statistic on the next page, is really a small fraction. So to the question of, are we just going to change Urbana government, or are we going to change the way that people all over Urbana in their daily lives make decisions about using resources? We cannot meet the Cool Cities goal that the mayor signed us up for if we only change our own behavior here in City Hall. If we change our light bulbs, if we buy more hybrid cars in the parking lot behind us, if we turn down the street lights, and if we try to save water and put in, new low flush toilets, that's not gonna meet the goal. Even if we turn off all the lights, if the governmental sector is only something like 3% of greenhouse gas emissions, we're not gonna meet that goal that the mayor signed us up to of getting 7% below the 1990 levels by the year 2012. So it has to be a community effort. We have to engage the public. We have to do outreach. We have to promote change among businesses, residences in town. And the last piece, the third bullet point, is examples of how to do that. In Minneapolis, a micro-grant program that gives $1,500 to schools and neighborhood associations to help them do energy audits or have give away light bulbs to people in the neighborhood and educate them about how to put in low-flow shower heads and things. And in Cambridge, a public-private partnership where $100 million of this sort of funding was leveraged from private entities because people in Cambridge recognized if they made change in their community to save, that they could stop sending money in their local economy out to buy foreign oil and pay for electricity and keep more money locally to make Cambridge a better place, more sustainable environmentally and economically. So we have to do that outreach, and those are some models that this great commission can move forward and look at.
The mayor. Thanks. And then Charlie.
We don't even know exactly where we were in 1990. So when I signed it, I thought, I don't know if we can do this, but what I did was say, okay, let's look at this kind of poetically, that we're going to make an effort in the right direction, and whether we can literally achieve that by 2012, I don't think we can, but perhaps we can. But we should know where we are. And some of that might be that we have to start with right now, because I don't know if we can go back. And those would just be estimates of where we were in 1990. So this is a huge issue, and I think we are probably ahead of a lot of other places because we're a small city and we have much more walking and biking, and we are very good on trees. So we're probably starting from a better level than many other places.
Charlie?
Yeah, and I've got 5 specific suggestions building on what Brandon said. First, if I could only have stuff this thick on electronically, I'd be perfectly happy, because that's how I read this. Okay, I've never bothered getting this far. So as you do revisions, please ask people if they need a paper copy. Only make paper copies for those that need them. I'm very comfortable. I take the black box with me everywhere. Item number 2, of course, I'm sure it won't be a surprise, lighting. And there we can affect.
Full cutoff.
Full cutoff, yes. Full
That's where
cutoff.
you know I'm learning.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Full cutoff, and of course, we can explore LED and other low-energy technologies.
looking in every city I go.
The thing is, with lighting, is if we change yeah, well, there's that too. If we change our city codes over time, we can impact the community. Okay, this is an example of, and I know Libby's looking at some of that. Idling, buses, cars, people idling their vehicles. There are a lot of places that have idling ordinances, and we need to look at that. There's no reason to have a bus spewing diesel for an hour sitting at the curb when it just doesn't need to be running. Modern diesels do not have to be kept running. So that's one. I know the MTD is already moving in that direction. They're changing their buses so they don't have to stay running to run their electronics. But we can move beyond just the MTD, who are doing it voluntarily. We should look at the use of waste oil products in this community as biodiesel. I know there's the whole controversy of food and energy, but waste oil can clearly be used for bioenergy. I know there's some of that already being done with the Waste Institute, and I hope that we get at least one member or two from the commission that is associated with the commission. That's why I'm saying I wonder if 7 members may be too few. And finally, one long-term interest of mine is water usage. We spew 20 million gallons a day into somebody else's watershed. Okay, we're not even putting it back in our own aquifer. We're not reusing it. Communities are looking at recycling water. And I think that's going to be increasingly important. Water use is a 50-year issue. It's really going to affect our grandchildren, and so that's one I think I'd like to see addressed here. Again, the commission can be very influential here, but that's a very long-term issue.
Robert, you were first.
That I could think of is we could start some kind of campaign to lobby for the Kyoto protocols somehow for our government, and that would make a change, because they have not really accepted the Kyoto protocols as far as a government body. I'm talking about going beyond us here. That would be one thing we could do once we start seeing some kind of results. Send letters, have our community people send letters to our representatives about the Kyoto protocols.
Mayor, and then Danielle.
Well, I just wanted to comment that it was the mayor of Seattle who got this climate protection thing started at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, because 141 countries had signed the Kyoto Agreement, and he wanted 141 U.S. mayors to sign it. And he's up to 700-something by now.
That's a help.
So I think that this is something that's going to be coming up. We'll have a new president, and so there's a fresh start there.
Danielle?
Yeah, I think part of, there's 2 pieces to moving forward. One is the education component, and the other is cost-benefit analyses of particular scenarios. And they go hand in glove. So there's a kind of what-if game that we can play. Like, what if Kraft factory grease ran our fleet? How much grease do they produce? What would it take to 500,000 gallons a year? So that's a good starting point. What would it take? 40,000 gallons of diesel. So I'm told. Charlie's done some work on this. You can ask him about it. But we're talking about building a public works facility, fleet maintenance facility. It seems like this would be really good timing for us to consider producing our own biodiesel. Let's look at that. What if lawns were watered by rain barrels instead of out of clean water from the Mohammed Aquifer? How much do people use to water their lawns in Urbana? So we can get a sense of whether or not that would really be of a great benefit and a point of leverage. And then let's look at if a certain percentage of them used rain barrels instead of clean water from the aquifer, what do rain barrels cost? at cost? Could the city of Urbana help to distribute them, et cetera? Could the recycling fund help to actually fund these other things, like buying rain barrels and maybe selling them at half the cost, if we decide that that's a point of leverage? We have a recycling center. Right now, we recycle leaves. One of our biggest trash streams, waste streams in the city of Urbana, and definitely look at Rod's report on this, because he did this whole analysis of trash and waste at the city that was very illuminating, shows that it's construction material that is the greatest. It makes up like 65% or something of the waste stream out of the city. So what if the recycling center recycled construction materials like lumber and sheetrock and things like that that are left over, so that so that people could have places to do improvements to their homes, and these kind of things didn't go to the landfill? How much waste is going to the landfill currently? What are some goals we could set, and how could we reach those goals? I met an architect, one of the top 100 architects in the world, Dave Sellers from Vermont, Burlington, Vermont, who has initiated this whole Sustainable Vermont initiative with Bernie Sanders, who's now a congressperson. Definitely look at the work that they are doing. He talked about a workshop that he did, which he's actually going to do in Urbana this fall. He's coming to teach at a school where I teach, and it would be nice to integrate him into this project in some way and get his thoughts on it. But he basically met with this community of 1,000 households, and he said, how many people have 2 cars? And they all raised their hands. And he said, well, how many people consider themselves to be middle class or working class? And they all raised their hands. And he said, okay, well, what if you all got rid of one of your 2 cars and instead you invested in a public transportation system? And he showed how actually, like, they had so much money by not having a second car per household, that they not only could build a public transportation system that would affect all of them, but they could also build new schools, they could have a free clinic. I mean, they continue to try to figure out how to spend all the money that they saved by simply getting rid of 1 car per household in this community. So it's those kind of things where we have to do the what if and show people, we're going to have a car sharing program coming to this city because of the efforts of the MTD. What would happen if we got our 2 and 3 car households to get rid of one of their cars and use this instead? What if? What would that look like in terms of energy consumption, oil consumption, et cetera? So I think that we need to play out some scenarios so that people can begin to see it and feel it and kind of buy into these ideas.
Charlie.
Okay, full disclosure, I got my information on craft from John Marlin, the Waste Management Institute. He's a wealth of knowledge of that kind of stuff. So there's somebody there, if it could be pursued. Extending the idea of ways of improving sustainability, I've been told that just substituting like 1 bicycle commuting trip a week in place of one of your car trips has a significant, if everybody did that, it would have a significant impact on global warming. And finally, my favorite form of sustainability is to trade in your car for a bicycle. And I'll take this moment to announce the 2nd annual Champaign County Bikes Bike Fest, which is this coming Saturday, May 4th, in Hessel Park from 11 to 4 p.m. This is both cities are actually involved. It's not mentioned at the bottom here, but both cities, the CUMTD, the Park Districts, the League of Illinois Bicyclists, among others, the CU Safe Routes to School, and the Bike Project are all involved in one way or another in supporting this. We will be unveiling our Share the Road bus at 11:30 next week, next Sunday. So did I say Saturday? It's Sunday, May 4th. So there will be a bike auction. There will be bikes available from the Bike Project for people to purchase. If you need cheap transportation, the Bike Project is rehabbing bikes and selling them basically for the experience of basically rebuilding a bike. And that's one of our businesses in the thank you, Independent Media Center.
Any other comments? Anna?
I do have a comment, and it is about establishing goals, because as we are looking at the influences of natural resource use, it really is embedded in everything. And so I I would hope that we could have goals established by, perhaps it's the commission or perhaps it's council, so that staff could have direction to use to determine how to proceed in doing the what-if game, because every what-if game requires a lot of research and a lot of data, and we want to make informed decisions. And so I would just remind all of us that none of these decisions are easy, and I hope that we can move forward strategically.
Is this, are any pieces of this things that we could forward to our constituents, or are they too not, I mean, we have in one time forwarded some other document that the staff put together, so this is kind of an upgrade of that. So I assume it's forwardable.
It's part of our zip file,
Right.
so will it become, something that can be more directly downloaded from the
Right.
web for the public?
More accessible, I mean, yeah.
It should be out there on the recycling page, or there should be a sustainability section. What I was thinking was that this becomes an introduction to its own web page of sorts, and I mentioned it to Bill DeJarnette. So I don't know, maybe this is the starting point for something that, where the report is out there and the steps that are taken and proposed can be disseminated.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, I think the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Seth.